It all starts with a big mystery about what kind of person actually gets to remember who they were in a past life. Inside a fancy mansion, a young girl named Faustina lies sick in bed while her worried father frantically asks the doctor how his daughter is doing. The doctor has no choice but to tell her father that they can't find a cause for the illness, and if the high fever doesn't stop, they need to prepare for the worst, which leaves him completely devastated. Her father begs the goddess Fortuna to save her life, but as Faustina hears him and wakes up, she realizes she's terrified of falling back asleep because she keeps having the same horrible dream. In that dark nightmare, she sees a terrifying vision where she is actually trying to kill her own sister. The memory then shows two young noble boys, a lilac-haired prince and a black-haired boy, who seem to be tied to the life she once lived. In her vision, Faustina is dancing with a man who looks at her with total disgust, saying he can't believe she really planned to kill her own sister. She stares back in absolute shock, her eyes wide as the weight of his words sinks in. Suddenly, Faustina wakes up in her own bed, with her heart pounding loudly, feeling completely shaken by the nightmare. She clutches her blanket and takes a shaky breath, asking herself if that whole awful scene was really just a dream. Thinking of the man's cold face, she tries to convince herself that it's all wrong as she squeezes her eyes shut in distress. Even though she's never had a dream like this before, she can't get over the fact that it all felt so familiar. Faustina wakes up and realizes that the intense feelings from her dream have carried over into her waking life, and everything is finally coming back to her. She comes to the startling realization that all those memories belong to her own past self. She introduces herself as Faustina, the eldest daughter of the Duke of Wittgenstein, because she was born with light blue hair and pale yellow eyes. Just like the goddesses the kingdom worships, she was chosen to be the crown prince's future wife. There's an old rule saying that anyone born as a reborn goddess has to marry into the royal family, and as the blonde maid calls out to her, Faustina thinks about this ancient promise. She is told she didn't need to hurry so much, but her mind is totally focused on the very first time she met the crown prince. Faustina rushes into the room and apologizes for making Prince Bernhard wait, thinking about how she used to be totally obsessed with him. However, the reality of that memory is a lot less sweet than she would like to think. It turns out that while she was head over heels for him, the prince definitely didn't feel the same way at all. Bernhard calls out to Elvira as if to protect her, while Elvira herself is shocked to see her big sister standing there. Elvira is completely stunned, and Bernhard immediately snaps at Faustina for showing up without an invitation, telling her she needs some self-control. He keeps laying into her, saying she is supposed to be studying right now, and that her behavior is really embarrassing for someone from such a noble family. Faustina is stunned when Prince Bernhard snaps at her to stop, and tells her she needs to start being nicer to her sister Elvira. Looking at them together, Faustina realizes that the one the prince truly loves is her sister, leaving her feeling like a total outsider. She thinks maybe it all started with a bad first impression, but for whatever reason, Prince Bernhard's dislike for her only grew as the years went by. Hoping to change his mind, she studies until she's exhausted, telling the maid she needs just a little more time when she's told to go rest. She pushes herself through the fatigue because she desperately wants to become a crown princess who is truly worthy of being with the prince. But while Faustina follows every rule, Elvira just does whatever she wants, gleefully admitting she skipped her study time just because she wanted to see the prince. Faustina realizes that no matter how much effort she puts in, she just can't change the way things are. It's hard for her to watch because her sister, Elvira, is always the one sticking close to Prince Bernhard's side. He even reaches out to gently play with Elvira's hair, showing her a kind side that Faustina never gets to see. As she watches them walk away, she's hit with the reality that her sister has taken everything, from their mother's love to her own fiancé. That hatred just keeps growing year after year, until Faustina finally reaches her breaking point. She admits she finally lost control, and Bernhard grabs her roughly, yelling that he can't believe she would actually try to kill her own sister. Faustina wakes up with a start, her eyes wide with shock and filled with tears. She thinks about what happened after that, remembering how her plan failed because the prince caught on before she could even do anything. She recalls her engagement being called off, and how her father and the queen barely saved her from being killed, even though her family still took away her title and threw her out. As she looks around the room, she realizes she can't remember a single thing past that point. Faustina stares at her hands in total disbelief, completely stunned by what she sees. She wonders what is going on since she has all her old memories, and just as she asks herself if she's redoing her life, the maid with the ponytail walks into the room. Rinsu rushes into the room and lets out a cry of relief, thanking goodness that Faustina has finally woken up. Faustina realizes this is indeed Rinsu, and the maid is so happy she immediately says she'll go get the girl's father and brother. Rinsu pulls Faustina into a tight hug, promising that she'll go anywhere her lady goes because she can't bear to leave her alone. Faustina's father is the next one to visit, and he's visibly moved to tears while telling her how glad he is that she's okay. Her brother joins in as well, asking if she remembers fainting since she's been unconscious for days, and had everyone really worried. Faustina then recalls a memory of her brother looking stern as he tells the Crown Prince and Elvira that they are the real reason everything went wrong. Faustina's father looks at her with a gentle, sad expression and apologizes for not noticing her pain much earlier. Faustina just stares back at him, her eyes filling with tears as his apology sinks in. She starts feeling a deep sense of regret for her past, thinking about how sorry she is for being so selfish and jealous. Faustina breaks down and hugs her father tightly, crying as she thinks about how much grief she must have caused her kind family. She thinks back on her past life and how she wasted time chasing someone who didn't love her, while ignoring Rinsu and her family who really did. Though she's not sure why she was given the chance to redo her life, she's determined that this time, things will be different. Faustina thinks to herself that she really wants to live a life where she can properly give back to all the people who treasure her. The scene shifts to the family's large, beautiful mansion as the sun shines down on the quiet grounds. Suddenly, the cheerful maid rushes into the room to announce that Prince Bernhard is actually coming over for a visit. Faustina is caught completely off guard by the news, looking up from her book in total surprise. The name of Crown Prince Bernhard immediately brings to mind the image of the young royal she used to chase after. She remembers how she suddenly got a high fever and passed out during their last scheduled meeting, so she realizes this will be her first time actually seeing him in person. Faustina remembers how she ruined their meeting in her past life by only talking about herself and being mean to Elvira, which made the prince hate her. She looks at the mansion and promises herself that she won't mess things up this time around. The cheerful maid exclaims that Faustina looks totally adorable in her fancy dress, leaving the girl feeling a little bit unsure of herself. The cheerful maid is certain the prince will be super happy to see her, so Faustina gets flustered and tells her to hurry up as she reaches for the door. They hear a lot of laughter coming from behind the big double doors, and the cheerful maid comments on how lively it sounds inside. Faustina starts to feel curious and wonders exactly who the prince is talking to in there. Inside the room, Faustina spots Prince Bernhard sitting on the sofa and having a friendly chat with another girl. The cheerful maid, Rinsu, peers through the door and is totally baffled about why Lady Elvira is there. Faustina puts on a polite smile and says they should just move along since she doesn't want to be rude and interrupt them. But then she suddenly runs off, leaving the cheerful maid calling after her in shock while the prince catches a glimpse and wonders what is going on. As she hurries away, someone from the room watches her go and is clearly confused by what they just saw. Faustina covers her face in a panic because this whole scene feels way too much like the bad memories from her past life. Rinsu huffs and asks what's wrong as Faustina sits shaking on the floor. Rinsu tells her she needs to get to the drawing room immediately, but Faustina asks if the maid would even have the guts to walk into that awkward mood. Rinsu admits she doesn't have the courage herself, but says Faustina has to go anyway, making the girl yell out in frustration. Rinsu tries to encourage her by saying the prince has been waiting all this time just to see her. Faustina argues that the prince was happily talking with Elvira, so if she goes in now, she'll just look like she's a jerk for interrupting them. Seeing the prince makes her feel like she knew this would happen, and she starts to wonder if she's just destined to become a terrible person in the end. As she watches from the shadows, Faustina thinks about how Prince Bernhard is bound to fall in love with Lady Elvira anyway. Even though she went through all of this once before and learned her lesson, she still finds herself hiding away in pain. She admits that somewhere deep in her heart, a tiny part of her was actually holding on to hope that things would be different this time. Looking down, her eyes are full of sadness as she struggles with these heavy feelings. Seeing her mistress so upset, Rinsu walks over and softly calls out to her to check on her. Rinsu says she understands and promises to go tell the others that Faustina suddenly started feeling unwell so she can have some space. Faustina huddles on the floor, hiding her face while the sound of footsteps draws closer. She softly calls out to Rinsu, and the maid pauses to look back at her one more time. With tears in her eyes and a slight blush, Faustina looks up and tells Rinsu how thankful she is for the help. Rinsu just gives her a warm, secret smile and promises to cover for her just for today. Now all alone, Faustina sits in a large chair, looking completely worn out and sad. She can't stop thinking about how easily the prince talked to Elvira, even though they just met, and she's convinced they were just meant to be together from the start. Looking at Prince Bernhard and Elvira so close together, Faustina feels like there is absolutely no room left for her in his life. She sits alone and thinks about how she was only picked as his fiancé because everyone believes she is the goddess reborn. She realizes that if Elvira had been the choice from the start, she wouldn't have been driven crazy by jealousy or felt forced to do something terrible. Thinking back to that time, she remembers desperately asking the prince why he was treating her this way. She had confronted him about always being with Elvira instead of dancing with his own fiancé, but he just brushed her off, saying it couldn't be helped. Bernhard uses the fact that Elvira doesn't have a fiancé as an excuse to stay by her side, and the dark-haired girl happily brings him a drink. Elvira suddenly trips with a little cry, but luckily Prince Bernhard is right there to catch her before she falls. Bernhard asks if she's all right and tells her to be careful, while Elvira blushes and tells him how kind he is. Watching this, Faustina gives her cheeks a quick slap to wake herself up and stop the negative thoughts. She decides there is no point in moping around because her memories already helped her avoid a terrible outcome today. She plans to write down everything she remembers in a notebook so she doesn't repeat any of her past mistakes. After all, she knows all too well that there is usually no real love found in these arranged marriages for rich families. Faustina decides she is done with one-sided love and won't marry someone who already likes someone else, vowing to herself that she won't make a mistake this time. She gets a bright idea and thinks that if she keeps acting sick and frail, everyone will think she is unfit to be the crown prince's fiancé, and the engagement will finally be cancelled. Feeling good about her new plan, Faustina settles on it and continues her work at her desk. Looking over her notes, she realizes that the memories she has gotten back so far are actually just a tiny part of the whole story. She finds it really weird that all her memories only seem to involve Prince Bernhard and Elvira, and she starts questioning why that might be. A few days pass by as she gets ready to put her new scheme into motion. Elvira is super proud of herself and excitedly shares that she finally learned how to eat carrots, even though she used to hate them. Bernhard smiles and tells her that getting over her dislikes is a great thing, and as she giggles happily, he continues the conversation with her. But then, out of nowhere, Bernhard asks if there is any food that Faustina dislikes, showing she's still on his mind. Elvira's mood instantly changes, and she gets a bit upset, telling him that it's really mean of him to bring that up. She complains that he's thinking of someone else while they're together, and while he tries to apologize, a voice at the door suddenly interrupts them. Right then, the door opens, and Faustina is formally announced as she steps into the room. As Faustina enters, Prince Bernhard calls out her name right away. Prince Bernhard tells her how glad he is that she showed up, while Faustina politely thanks him for coming too. He mentions he heard she was starting to feel better, but he trails off as he looks at her. Elvira acts a bit stuck up and points out that her big sister actually came today, while Faustina just says her name in response. Faustina just keeps a very calm and serious face while she looks at them. When Faustina steps forward, Elvira is so caught off guard that she jumps and lets out a little gasp. Faustina politely thanks Elvira for keeping the prince company until she arrived, which completely catches her sister off guard. Elvira is left staring blankly, totally surprised by the unexpected kindness. Elvira tries to save face by acting like she only stayed because she felt bad for Lord Bernhard since her big sister was late. Seeing her sister's reaction, Faustina realizes that things might be taking a tricky turn. She's actually thrilled that she stayed calm, telling herself that being too jealous is just plain ugly, and she's glad she handled it the right way. Feeling good about herself, Faustina decides to move things along and says she'll get everyone a fresh drink. Prince Bernhard looks over at her with a kind, gentle smile. Faustina politely invites the prince to help himself to the sweets on the table, and he thanks her as they settle onto the couch together. She watches him quietly, her mind completely filled with thoughts of Prince Bernhard. To her, even though his silver-purple hair and blue eyes can seem a bit cold, he has a warmth about him that no one else sees. Looking at him, she realizes deep down that she really did love every single thing about him. Even after getting her old memories back, that strong feeling of love is still there, and she grips her glass tightly while thinking about how things were in her past life. Faustina notices Prince Bernhard looking at her with such kind eyes, which she notes has never happened before. She apologizes for getting sick so suddenly the other day, but the prince gently tells her it's totally fine. He gives her a warm smile and says he's just glad she looks much better today, which leaves her completely stunned. Faustina goes quiet for a moment, causing Prince Bernhard to call out her name to make sure she's all right. She quickly tries to play it cool, though she's secretly shocked that he would ever smile at her this way. Then it hits her that since she hasn't bullied her sister yet, this must be before he ever started to hate her. Prince Bernhard looks over at Faustina with a really serious and worried expression. He asks if she's still feeling sick and apologizes for pushing her too hard, making Faustina try to explain herself while thinking that she only meant to act a little weak. Prince Bernhard is completely caught off guard, when Faustina suddenly starts crying and offers him an apology. Faustina looks totally stunned and confused by her own tears, as if she can't believe she's actually crying. Prince Bernhard asks if she's in pain, but while Faustina panics about things going way too far, she just tells him the lights are too bright. Even after her excuse, the prince leans in with a worried look and asks her once more if she's truly okay. Prince Bernhard hands her a handkerchief, and Faustina realizes his kind words and gentle gaze are all she ever really wanted. As she thanks him through her tears, she thinks about how a tiny bit of his kindness was her only wish. Seeing her get so emotional makes the prince blush. Clearly caught off guard by her reaction, he tells her he wants to get to know her better and asks what she likes, so he can bring a gift on his next visit. Faustina explains she has a request that isn't about a physical thing, and the prince excitedly tells her he'll do anything. She leans in and asks for just one thing. If he ever falls for someone else, he needs to let her know right away. Prince Bernhard looks completely stunned, his cheeks turning a light shade of pink as he processes what she just said. He lets out a confused, "huh," while Faustina jumps in, eagerly telling him she is more than happy to go along with his proposal. She starts planning ahead, thinking that if she plays her part as his fiancée now, he can easily use her words later when he eventually ends up with a girl named Elvira. She is convinced that Prince Bernhard can only find true happiness with Elvira, and that is why she is taking this approach. With a huge smile on her face, she cheers because her real goal is to get their engagement cancelled, leaving the prince totally speechless in the background. She looks him in the eye and asks that if he ever starts liking someone else, he should be sure to tell her right away. Faustina thinks to herself that since she's living her life for a second time, she knows for a fact the prince will fall for her younger sister, so ending their engagement now is the best move for him. Prince Bernhard sits there looking pretty down as he quietly starts to say Faustina's name. He looks really hurt and worried as he asks if she thinks he's going to end up hating her. Faustina is totally shocked and wonders if she's the one who will end up hating him, but she quickly tells herself that she definitely doesn't have those kinds of feelings for the prince. She realizes that in this timeline, the prince doesn't actually hate her yet, and his reaction is completely different from the first time around. Faustina stays silent, clearly seeing that things are already changing in this new life. Prince Bernhard looks pretty troubled, sweating as he asks Faustina why on earth she'd want to break their engagement. Caught off guard by his intense question, Faustina gets all flustered and struggles to find the right words. She quickly fakes a coughing fit, lying that a healthier girl would be a much better wife for him since she's so frail, even though it's totally an act. Seeing how sick she supposedly is, Bernhard looks downcast and says he'll head out now, so he doesn't accidentally push her too hard. Once he's gone, Faustina starts to worry if she was being way too hasty about trying to end things so suddenly. She remembers seeing the prince and her sister together, which only makes her more sure that he's bound to fall in love with her sister eventually. Faustina thinks that even if Prince Bernhard seems to like her right now as his fiancée, she's certain that down the road, he'll definitely choose her sister over her. This thought leaves her with a sharp, nagging pain right in her chest. She tries to tell herself it's no big deal, like a tiny fishbone stuck in her throat, and nothing more. Since that day, Prince Bernhard has come to visit several times, but Faustina makes sure to avoid him every single time. The official story she's telling everyone is that she simply hasn't been feeling very well, but the real truth is something she's keeping to herself while she watches the prince and her sister together from her window. Faustina gazes through the window at Prince Bernhard and her sister, looking happy together, her face filled with a quiet sadness. Feeling left out, she turns away and rests her hand against the wall, trying to process the pain in her heart. Just then, someone shouts her name so loudly that it makes her jump in surprise. She looks down the hall and sees her mother staring her down with a very stern and serious expression. Her mother asks if she was aware that Prince Bernhard was visiting today, and Faustina nervously grips her dress while admitting she knew. Looking really frustrated, her mother demands to know why she won't go greet him when he has been waiting there just for her. Faustina looks her mother right in the eye and asks if she actually believes what she's saying. Her mother is completely stunned to realize Faustina had no idea Elvira was lurking nearby the entire time. She gets flustered, realizing her sister should have been busy with her tutor instead of following them around. Seeing her mother's reaction, Faustina realizes she knew all along and feels like history is repeating itself once again. She thinks back to how her mother only ever showed affection to her sister because Elvira looked just like her. While her sister was pampered, Faustina was always the only one treated with a cold and strict attitude. Elvira throws a huge tantrum on the sofa, crying out that she doesn't want to study anymore. Faustina's mother starts to say it's necessary to become a fine lady, but she quickly gives in and says it can't be helped. Out of nowhere, Her mother says a change of pace is needed sometimes and suggests they go out today, leaving Faustina completely shocked. Faustina's eyes start to sparkle with hope as she thinks she might actually get to spend time with them. She excitedly says she wants to come too and asks her mother if she can take the day off to join them. But the warm moment vanishes as her mother gives her an ice-cold look and asks her what she thinks she's saying. Faustina is totally stunned as her mother coldly reminds her that she's supposed to become the queen and asks what will happen to her if she stays so coddled. The hits keep coming as her mother mentions she heard a lower-ranking baron's daughter her age can dance much more elegantly than she can. When Faustina tries to speak up, her mother asks if she isn't ashamed to be from such a high-ranking family, forcing the poor girl to just sob and apologize again. As Faustina walks away into the shadows, she realizes it doesn't even matter anymore if her mother spoils Elvira, or clearly hates her. Faustina's mother looks a bit shocked as the girl finally decides within herself that she just doesn't care about any of it anymore. She promises herself that she's done looking for any motherly love because she's tired of being the only one targeted by these mean and unfair words. Faustina turns her back and walks away, leaving her mother totally speechless and calling out her name in shock. Looking through the window, her mother seems really uneasy and starts to sweat as she watches her daughter go. Outside, she catches a glimpse of a young boy and girl walking side by side through the garden. Her mother starts to wonder if seeing her together with the boy made things too painful for Faustina to even come inside. She just stands there in the middle of the giant hallway, looking pretty lonely as she thinks things over. Meanwhile, a bright and energetic girl points her finger and promises that today is finally the day they're going to meet the prince. Faustina tries to stop her, but Lince scolds her for constantly ignoring her fiancé and accuses her of lying about being sick, which Faustina weakly denies. The maid looks her lady right in the eyes with a very serious and firm expression. Lince points out that the crown prince waits for her every single time and always leaves looking really sad whenever she doesn't show up. After a quiet moment, Lince mentions that Lady Elvira won't be around to bother them today because she's busy having tea with the madam. Faustina wonders if that's really the case, and a cheerful Lince tells her it's finally time to get ready. Faustina finally gives in and agrees to go, admitting it would be rude to keep him waiting all by himself. Faustina finally enters the room and bows slightly, apologizing to the crown prince for making him wait. The crown prince looks super happy to see her and calls out her name with a big smile. She tells him how sorry she is for turning him away so many times when he visited, but he gently tells her that it is totally okay. He holds her hand and looks her in the eye, saying how glad he is that he actually got to see her today. Faustina is completely caught off guard by his sweet words and looks a bit flustered. As they get settled with some tea and sweets, the crown prince mentions that Nija's health has been slowly getting better lately. Faustina is super surprised and excited when she hears the news. It turns out Prince Nij is Prince Bernhard's younger brother, but because he's been sick since birth, people almost never see him in public. Faustina remembers him as a really kind and smart person who helped her out a lot in her past life, so she promises herself that she won't cause him any trouble this time. Bernhard explains that even though Nij still can't go outside or move much, he's finally able to stay awake longer, and Faustina thinks that is just wonderful. She smiles warmly and tells the prince that if there is anything her noble family can do to help, he shouldn't be afraid to ask. Prince Bernhard gives her a really sweet look and softly thanks Faustina for her kind offer. Prince Bernhard explains they are changing Prince Nij's diet to help him get stronger, working with the castle chef and doctor to make sure his meals are easy to digest but still super nutritious. Faustina laughs and admits she can't seem to stop herself from doing all the talking. She tells Prince Bernhard it is perfectly fine, as she can see just how much he truly loves and treasures his younger brother. Prince Bernhard smiles warmly as he remembers their meal, admitting he was just so happy he and Prince Najij could finally have breakfast together. Faustina thinks that is wonderful news, but then Prince Bernhard mentions that he noticed her sister isn't around today. The moment her sister is mentioned, Faustina's face goes totally blank and her eyes lose all their light. Faustina realizes that Elvira is still on the prince's mind, so she asks him if she should go and call for her. Prince Bernhard says it's fine, and that he only found it odd because Elvira is always there, while Faustina worries he's just holding back his true feelings while she's around. After a brief silence, Prince Bernhard tells her there's something else he really needs to ask her. He notes that Lady Elvira is always present whenever he comes to visit, but he's noticed a pattern. Prince Bernhard looks at her directly and asks if Faustina is actually the one having Elvira come over every time. Faustina is caught completely off guard by the question and looks totally surprised. The prince asks if she's just been using her sister to keep him busy because she thought he didn't want to see her, and Faustina panics, swearing she'd never do that and that Elvira just visits on her own. Faustina tries to argue that she never thought he didn't want to see her, but the prince just calmly asks if that's really the case. He calls her out, saying that even though he sends letters ahead of time, she always manages to avoid seeing him, leaving her totally stumped. He brings up how she always uses the excuse of feeling sick as a reason to not meet with him. The prince explains that he eventually asked her brother about her health to see if she was actually struggling. Her brother just told him that Faustina eats way too many snacks every day, so if she was feeling bad, it was probably just a regular stomachache. Faustina is totally mortified that her own brother would sell her out like that, and she lets out a frustrated shout at him. She admits her brother isn't to blame, and says she never asked him to lie for her, realizing it was wrong to fake being sick when she's actually very healthy, but the prince stops her mid-sentence. Prince Bernhard looks her dead in the eye with a serious face and asks her exactly what she means by all that. Seeing his intense gaze, Faustina is completely stunned and feels a chill run down her spine. Those cold eyes are a painful reminder of how the prince acted toward her in her past life. She flashes back to a terrifying moment where he grabbed her and accused her of planning to take her own sister's life. Prince Bernhard demands an answer, and a pained Faustina struggles to find the right words to say. She finally lets it out, telling him she felt like he was having much more fun spending time with Elvira than with her. This catches Prince Bernhard completely off guard, and he explains he only stayed away because he didn't want to get in her way. As the prince starts to wonder what this all really means, Faustina realizes she might have just said way too much. She grabs her head in total panic, freaking out that her flustered words make her sound incredibly jealous of Elvira. Prince Bernhard admits he really did enjoy himself, which leaves a surprised Faustina wondering how to even respond. Looking a bit shy, Prince Bernhard admits he's heard plenty of personal stories about Faustina that normally only family would know. Faustina is completely caught off guard, her eyes going wide with total shock at his confession. She is totally confused and tries to process what he just said, wondering why on earth he'd be hearing stories about her. Her face turns bright red as the embarrassment hits her, and she is so stunned she can't even find her words. The two of them just sit there in a super awkward silence, both blushing and not sure what to say next. Later, while she is tucked into bed, Faustina keeps thinking about how Prince Bernhard was actually talking about her the whole time, and that's why he looked like he was having so much fun. Faustina thrashes around in bed, kicking her feet in total embarrassment after her talk with the prince. She burrows under the covers, thinking about how he didn't even want to see her in the past. She reflects that if she had just given a straight answer back then, she might have been one step closer to ending their engagement. But as she lies there, she still feels a bit torn about how things are going. She remembers all the trouble she caused for so many people before, which is exactly why she has one specific wish now. Faustina sits up and declares that she wants a peaceful way to end the engagement, since she knows hurting the prince or bullying her sister would be wrong. Prince Bernhard gives her a really sweet, gentle smile that looks totally genuine. Seeing that smile makes Faustina lose it, and she dives into her pillow, hugging it tight while she squeals from being so flustered. She tries to calm herself down by telling herself everything is fine, even though she's feeling very confused about the prince. As the night goes on, she shouts into the air that she loves him, but she also really doesn't want to love him. She remembers him blushing on the sofa as he told her he had a great time because he got to hear private family stories about her that no one else knows. With her face still bright red from all that thinking, she grabs a drink and tries to get her racing heart under control. The blonde-haired maid notices Faustina looks a bit flushed and asks if she's okay, but Faustina just tries to brush it off and says it's nothing. The maid worries that she might have caught a cold, but Faustina snaps back that she's totally fine, so the maid just gives in and heads out. Looking off into the distance, Faustina reminds herself that as a duke's daughter, she's actually living through her second chance at life. She knows her fiancé, Prince Bernhard, is destined to fall for her younger sister, so her whole plan was to get their engagement cancelled. But things are getting complicated. She gets all flustered thinking about how the prince told her he loved hearing stories about her, and it's making her face turn red all over again. Just as the blonde-haired maid is about to leave, she's stopped in her tracks when she runs right into a stern-looking noblewoman at the door. Faustina calls out to her mother, but the woman just stares back with a heavy silence. Faustina admits they don't get along at all, and she's tired of hearing all those mean and unfair things her mother always says to her. Since she finally stood up to her for the first time the other day, they've been avoiding each other as much as possible. Walking toward the door, Faustina asks what's going on, looking pretty surprised to see her mother there with a maid. Her mother explains she brought a designer over to order a new dress, and asks if Faustina doesn't need a new one for herself too. Faustina is confused by the sudden offer and tells her she doesn't need anything because she still has plenty of unworn clothes in her closet. The stern-looking noblewoman falls quiet for a moment after being rejected, eventually just saying she understands. As the door clicks shut, Faustina and the blonde-haired maid stand in total silence, the tension finally leaving the room. The blonde-haired maid asks if it was really okay to turn her mother down, but Faustina is happy with her choice, saying she prefers simple, comfy clothes since she doesn't go to tea parties anyway. In her past life, Faustina was so in love with the prince that she forced herself to wear flashy, over-the-top dresses just to feel worthy of him, even though she actually hated them. Faustina feels relieved she doesn't have to push herself anymore, but the blonde-haired maid is still worried if it was really a good idea to refuse her mother. The blonde-haired maid reminds her that the prince coming personally to her room is something that never happens, and Faustina can't help but agree that it is pretty unusual. Faustina starts wondering if her mother was actually trying to be considerate and reach out to her for once. She quickly dismisses the idea as impossible, but then the blonde-haired maid tells her she can't have any more drinks. Just then, a voice from outside the mansion yells out about how mean her older sister is being. Elvira, Faustina's younger sister, bursts in looking totally furious and demands to know why no one told her the prince visited yesterday. The blonde-haired maid points out that Elvira was busy having tea with her mother at the time, but Elvira just keeps shouting, desperate to know what the two of them talked about alone. Elvira is annoyed by her sister's weird look, so Faustina snaps back that the prince is her fiancé and was there to see her, not someone who wasn't even invited. Faustina stands there completely stunned, gasping in surprise at the drama unfolding. Faustina realizes this is exactly like a scene that happened once before, as Elvira starts crying about how cruel everyone is being. While the maid and Faustina look on in shock, Elvira wails at the top of her lungs that she just wants to be close to Lord Bernhard. The blonde-haired maid tries to get Elvira to quiet down, but then their mother's sharp voice cuts in, demanding to know what everyone is doing. Seeing her mother arrive, Elvira looks up with big, teary eyes and cries out for her. Elvira struggles to speak through her heavy sobbing, so the dark-haired noblewoman holds her and gently tells her to stop crying. Faustina watches the scene unfold and realizes it's exactly like before, with Elvira acting like a victim and making her look like a bully. The dark-haired noblewoman turns on Faustina right away and demands to know what she thinks she's doing. The blonde-haired maid quickly steps in to defend her mistress, explaining that Faustina did nothing wrong and was just answering Elvira's questions about the prince's visit. Even after hearing the truth, the dark-haired noblewoman doesn't care and snaps that there is still a better way to speak to others. As her mother yells at her to watch her mouth, Faustina can only think to herself that she knew this would happen. Faustina feels silly for thinking her mother was actually trying to be nice to her, so she looks down and prepares to answer back as politely as possible. Kane steps in and says Elvira is also responsible for the trouble, which makes the others realize Brother Kane is finally speaking up. He notes that every time the crown prince visits their home, the prince ends up asking why Elvira is always hanging around. Looking at his sister clinging to their mother, Kane says it's becoming impossible to tell which girl is actually the prince's fiancée. Then he focuses his attention entirely on Elvira. He calls her out for skipping her tutor's lessons just to run off and see the crown prince when he's there. He warns her that if she doesn't take her studies seriously, she'll never become a proper lady, no matter how much time passes. The dark-haired noblewoman tells Kane he's going a bit too far, but he asks his mother to stop ignoring how Elvira keeps skipping her lessons. He warns Elvira that she is the only one who will suffer if she keeps this up, leaving the dark-haired noblewoman completely speechless. Giving in, the dark-haired noblewoman says she understands and suggests that she and Elvira start focusing on studies tomorrow. When her mother asks if that sounds okay, Elvira gives a tiny, unhappy yes. As her sister and mother walk away, Faustina watches her brother Kane and quietly calls out to him. She remembers how he always protected her in the past, even when he had to call out their mother for helping Elvira with her mean tricks. Kane snaps at the others, asking if they have any clue how much hard work Faustina put in to earn her spot as the crown princess. Faustina is left completely stunned by her brother's sudden and intense outburst. She starts worrying about the past life she can't fully remember, wondering if Elvira took her title and what happened to Kane and her other protector Lince after the family threw her out. Looking at her brother, she can't help but fear that things might have turned out really badly for the people who tried to help her before. Suddenly, Kane reaches out and flicks Faustina's forehead, telling her she needs to think about what just happened too. While Faustina rubs her head in pain, Kane points out that she should have known Elvira would start crying if she spoke to her so bluntly. Kane shakes his head and sighs, clearly thinking his sister is a lot to deal with. Faustina just gives him a sweet, blushing smile, looking like she's in a really great mood. She suddenly grabs his arm and hugs it tightly while they walk, catching him a bit off guard. Kane teases her by saying she's heavy as they head off, but she just giggles, feeling totally sure about her new path. She promises herself that she won't make the same mistakes this time because she refuses to let her brother or her friends go through a sad ending again. Thinking about the blonde prince, Faustina closes her eyes and decides she'll do whatever it takes to reach her goal. Faustina knows she has to find a way to end her engagement with the prince as soon as possible. As she rides along in her carriage, she starts going over the details of her current situation. She realizes her first step is making sure the prince doesn't actually decide he wants a girl named Elvira to be his future wife instead. Their engagement is a formal agreement between the royal family and her own noble house, but they've kept it a secret until they both enter the academy for their big debut. They're waiting to announce it because she once collapsed with a high fever, and there's a worry that if she gets sick again, people will say she isn't healthy enough to be the princess. Faustina thought acting like she had a weak body would be a good way to get out of the marriage, but she sighs because that plan has already failed. A voice snaps Faustina out of her thoughts to let her know they have finally arrived at their destination. Looking up at the castle towers, Faustina tells herself she needs to focus because her life is about to change once again. Waiting inside is a noble-looking woman with a tiara and an elegant dress, sitting at a desk piled with books. It turns out this is where Faustina's training to become the next queen is going to start. The queen looks up with a kind smile and asks Faustina how she has been feeling since they last met. Faustina greets the queen with respect and says she is doing well, apologizing for making everyone worry about her health. The queen tells Faustina that her health is the only thing that really matters, and Faustina can't help but think about how the queen is just as kind as she is beautiful. The queen suggests they start their lessons right away, though she promises to take things easy since it is Faustina's first day back. That promise of an easy day disappears instantly when the queen brings out 5 massive history books, leaving Faustina realizing this is going to be a lot harder than it looks. Faustina gets to work, and after a while, the queen looks over her progress and gives her a warm compliment for doing such a good job. The queen finally ends the lesson for the day, which is a huge relief for Faustina because she is absolutely worn out from all that studying. Reminding herself to stay professional until the very end, Faustina gives a polite bow and thanks the queen for the guidance. The queen smiles warmly and suggests they take a break to have some tea. While they enjoy their snacks, the queen asks Faustina what she usually calls Bernhard. Faustina explains that she calls him His Highness, and the queen nods along as she listens. The queen mentions that since she is his fiancé now, it would be nice to call him by his name. Faustina nervously agrees and thinks to herself that she should start calling him Lord Bernhard. She remembers how much she wanted this in the past, but back then, trying to say his name only earned her a look of total hate and disgust from his blue eyes. Faustina stays silent as she thinks about how Bernhard treated Elvira differently, while the queen points out that the cookies they are eating were made by Marchioness Laris. The queen tells Faustina she has plenty of cookies and wants her to take some home, which Faustina gratefully accepts. Walking with a maid, Faustina considers the idea of just quitting her lessons and ending the engagement, but she isn't sure she can go through with it. She realizes it would be rude to cancel since the queen is so busy, and besides, she actually really likes the queen and doesn't want to hurt their relationship. She gets a bit flustered, realizing that ending an engagement on good terms is probably way harder than she's making it out to be. Faustina worries that if she messes up and gets kicked out of her family house, it would break everyone's hearts, and she wishes she had someone she could actually talk to about her problems. Faustina points a finger up while wishing she could find someone who also has memories of their past life, just like her. She quickly thinks to herself that there's no way someone like that exists, just as her maid calls out to get her attention. The maid asks if she would like to go see the crown prince, leaving Faustina standing there in a silent, awkward daze. Faustina finds the prince and apologizes for the interruption, asking if he was still in the middle of his sword practice. Bernhard just lets out a heavy, tired sigh, as if something is really weighing on his mind. Bernhard turns to his brother and asks what the problem is, but his brother just says he was lost in thought about something. Faustina is suddenly approached by the second prince, Nej, who asks if she's the one his brother is engaged to. Bernhard looks up and seems a little flustered to see her standing there. He gets really embarrassed and tells Faustina that his mother always talks about her and says she's really smart. Nej adds that they heard her relationship with Bernhard is going great, which makes Faustina wonder if that's a problem, while Bernhard just sighs in agreement. Bernhard's face becomes serious as he brings up a woman named Lady Elvira and her younger sister. He explains that he sees the younger sister at the Duke's house all the time, and while he doesn't want to be mean to her, he's worried Faustina will be upset if he gets too close to another girl. Nej stays quiet for a moment, clearly thinking over what his brother just said. He agrees it is a valid point, but admits that since he does not have a fiancé yet, he does not fully understand how these things work. Nej looks up at Bernhard and asks if it would not actually be better to have a partner who is kind to his own younger sister. He explains that women do not just care about how they are treated personally, but they also watch how a man treats everyone else. This piece of advice really seems to catch Bernhard off guard, and he goes silent as he takes it all in. Nej adds that he would definitely fall for someone who was kind to his brother, which helps Bernhard finally see the truth as he thanks him for the help. The scene starts with Elvira's sister giving a bright, happy smile, looking totally content. Over at the mansion, a maid's voice rings out as she calls for the lady of the house, while Faustina and Nej are relaxing in the lounge. The cheerful maid excitedly brings in a large gift box and announces that a present has just arrived from Prince Bernhard. Nej encourages Faustina to go ahead and open it, while she looks totally caught off guard by the surprise. Faustina's eyes go wide as she sees a beautiful dress inside, and she gasps at how wonderful it looks while the others watch. She then finds a small card tucked inside, addressed specifically to her, making the gift feel even more personal. Prince Bernhard's note explains that he wants Faustina to wear the beautiful dress to his upcoming birthday party. The note ends with him politely asking her to let him know what she thinks about it. Faustina is a bit confused and asks her brother why the prince would send her a gift for a party where he is supposed to be the star. Nej just sighs and mutters to himself that if Faustina stays this clueless, the prince's hard work will never pay off. When Faustina asks what he means by that, Nej tells her she needs to figure it out for herself. Nej then tells the cheerful maid to take the precious gift to the room where they keep their valuables, and she quickly agrees. Faustina calls out to her brother, but Nej just stares back in silence. Nej looks pretty serious as he explains he is only being cautious just in case something happens. Somewhere else, the girl with the bow-covered dress looks like she is in a really bad mood. Faustina looks at the flowers and remembers that their secret meaning is a young girl's prayer. She realizes that her own prayer from a while back must have been very specific. She had hoped with all her heart that her one-sided love for Prince Bernhard would finally come true. Faustina explains that she's a duke's daughter starting her life over, mainly because in her past life, her fiancé ended up falling for her younger sister. Back then, her jealousy got the best of her, and she even tried to kill her sister, which got her condemned and kicked out of her family's house. She feels awful because while she can't remember the rest, she's sure she made life miserable for the people who actually stuck by her side. The maid tells her they should head back to her room before she gets sick, so Faustina agrees while deciding exactly what she's praying for this time. This time around, her big goal is simply to find a way to break off her engagement in a nice, peaceful way. But as they walk through the house, Faustina suddenly stops in her tracks and panics, wondering why something she's looking for is missing. Faustina is clearly worried as someone shouts that something should be there, and she begs them to stop. Suddenly, Elvira goes running off, catching Faustina completely off guard. When they reach the room, the blonde-haired maid is horrified to see the place trashed, while Faustina just stares in silence. With a cold look, Elvira says she has a favor to ask and tells Faustina she wants to wear the dress Prince Bernhard gifted her. Faustina is completely speechless, struggling to even process what her sister is actually saying. Elvira starts explaining herself, saying that compared to her big sister, things are different for her. Faustina's sister smirks and asks if the dress wouldn't look better on her, making Faustina realize she's always been this way. She remembers how in her past life, her sister acted like a poor girl being bullied just to win Prince Bernhard's attention. Back in the present, the sister yells that Faustina should just go get a similar dress made for herself instead. Faustina is confused and starts to wonder if the reason things are different this time is because of something she did. Just then, the Duke walks in and asks what all the noise is about, catching them both off guard. Faustina calls out to her father in surprise, while her sister looks pretty annoyed that he showed up. The maid starts telling the Duke about what Elvira did, but she sounds a bit nervous about speaking up. The Duke tells Elvira that the dress she's wearing was actually meant for Faustina, though Elvira tries to talk back right away. He asks if she just took it because it's such a pretty dress, and Elvira stays silent, looking a bit guilty. He points out that if she wears a gift meant for Faustina, the prince might even think she stole it. Elvira says she didn't mean anything by it, but the Duke tells her she's still making people feel bad while Faustina watches on. While Elvira stays quiet, Faustina looks at them and feels so happy that her father showed up to help. Even after everything that happened, Faustina can't stop thinking about how Elvira was acting just a moment ago. Seeing her sister's temper makes Faustina realize that Elvira is acting exactly like she did back in her own past life. It honestly gives her a bit of a chill because it feels like their roles have been completely flipped this time around. Faustina worries that Elvira's attitude will lead to trouble, and since she's going to be the prince's new fiancé, she really needs to learn how to act like a queen. She tells herself that these steps are necessary to build a future where everyone can finally be happy. As they get ready, Faustina tells her maid Linso that she's brushed her hair enough, but the confused maid asks her what she means by that. Linso gets super excited because tonight is the Crown Prince's birthday party, and she promises Faustina that she's going to work extra hard to make her look perfect. Faustina asks for a simple style that isn't too flashy, so the maids suggest a half-up look and talk about finding the right ornament to match her necklace. Looking at herself in the mirror, Faustina thinks back to how she used to be the one giving all the orders and trying so hard to be the center of attention. She remembers how painful it was that despite all her effort, her fiancé was only ever interested in her sister. She remembers taking her anger out on Elvira by throwing juice on her, which made everyone really angry and caused the prince to hate her even more. Faustina covers her face in shame, admitting to herself that she really was a lost cause back then. Faustina realizes that having these memories of her past life is exactly what will help her avoid a terrible future. She looks up at the castle's pointed towers and promises herself she is going to get through tonight without any problems. Inside, the party is in full swing, with drinks laid out as the guests mingle and chat. The ballroom is massive and beautiful, packed with nobles under the light of a giant chandelier. The dark-haired boy notices Elvira looking pretty moody and asks her to please cheer up. He tries to be nice by telling Elvira her dress looks great and asks if she picked it out with their mother. Elvira looks skeptical and admits that while it might be true, she still has some doubts. Faustina looks stunning in her own fancy outfit, standing elegantly amidst the decorations. Faustina keeps her composure with her eyes shut, but Elvira stands nearby looking totally annoyed and overwhelmed. Faustina breaks the silence by telling Elvira that her dress looks wonderful on her. Elvira isn't convinced though, telling her big sister that even a compliment like that just feels like sarcasm coming from her. Faustina simply smiles back and gently promises her that it really does look great. Elvira is totally caught off guard by the sudden praise and can't even find any words to say. She asks if Faustina really thinks so, and her sister doubles down, telling her the color makes her hair look beautiful and she looks lovely. Hearing that, Elvira's guard finally drops and she shyly accepts the compliment since Faustina is being so persistent. Faustina looks at her sister's happy face and thinks she looks like a little fairy from a book, remembering how the prince was totally charmed by her in her past life as well. Up on the dais, the king and queen are seated in the grand throne room, with the young crown prince standing right beside them. The young prince himself is standing there in his fancy uniform, looking quite handsome and composed for the party. Everyone gathers at the base of the stairs to wish the crown prince, Bernhard, a very happy 8th birthday. Bernhard looks very polite and handsome in his royal suit as he smiles and thanks all the guests for coming. The king addresses the crowd from his throne, specifically thanking Citrine, Ludmila, and their children for being there. The king notices how much the young Kane has grown, and mentions that starting this year, things will be different for him. Bernhard just watches with a knowing, subtle smile, looking like he's got something on his mind. Faustina keeps her eyes on her sister Elvira, who looks calm and lovely with all the bows in her hair. Faustina looks down at her fancy outfit with a serious expression. She realizes the dress is exactly the same as the one from her past, and though she admits it looks lovely, the timing feels off. The long-haired maid says the colors match her eyes perfectly, while the short-haired maid is amazed by all the real pearls decorating the gown. Despite the compliments, Faustina worries that all this effort is pointless if she can't catch the eye of the one person she cares about. Looking out at the crowded ballroom, she sees the other nobles gathered for the big celebration. She tells herself that if she just stays put, she can make sure that awful moment where juice gets thrown on Elvira never happens. Faustina is planning to stay quiet and out of the way when Bernhard suddenly runs up and calls out her name. She is shocked to see the crown prince, but he looks relieved as he tells her he's glad he finally found her. Bernhard wonders why she's standing off to the side and asks her what she's been doing in this spot. She gives a nervous smile, thinking to herself that she definitely can't admit she was just trying to be a wallflower to avoid standing out. Instead, she tells him she was just watching the crowd and thinking about all the different types of people here. Bernhard agrees that there are many different people in the country and says it's their duty to lead and protect all of them. Looking out at the crowd, Faustina thinks about more than just the rich families, keeping the everyday people from the castle town in her thoughts too. Bernhard admits he still has a lot to learn, but he promises to study hard so he can gain the knowledge needed to help everyone struggling with poverty. He gives her a warm smile and says that when he is finally ready to make those big changes, he wants Faustina to be right there helping him. Faustina stays silent for a moment, thinking about how he was born to be king and has carried that weight his whole life. She knows better than anyone that even with all his natural talent, he never got lazy or stopped putting in the effort to be a great leader. Faustina reflects on how she never stopped watching him even when she was hated and despised. And suddenly Bernhard holds out his hand and asks her to dance. As they take each other's hands, Faustina starts to get a little nervous about how well she can actually dance. Bernhard leads her out onto the floor with a calm smile, catching Faustina completely off guard. Suddenly, the prince leans in really close to her, making her heart skip a beat. He thanks her for wearing the dress he picked and tells her it looks really good on her. Bernhard admits that even though he was looking at Elvira earlier, he was actually just too shy to look at Faustina. But now that they are dancing, he can finally look at her directly. Hearing such an honest confession makes Faustina's face turn bright red as she looks up at him. Bernhard tells Faustina he is sorry, but he has to head back soon. He gives her a little wave and says he had a really great time today. Blushing, Faustina waves back and tells him she enjoyed herself too. A servant offers her a drink, and she politely thanks them as she takes a glass. Suddenly, a girl with a rose ribbon in her hair snaps her head away and walks off. Faustina watches her leave and wonders just who that person could be. Suddenly, a glass slips and juice spills everywhere, while a scream rings out across the room. Faustina's sister, the dark-haired girl in twin tails, looks up with a mean look and calls Faustina cruel for what just happened. Seeing the dark stains on the white dress, Faustina realizes that this is the exact same mess that happened in her past life. Faustina calmly asks if her sister is okay and points out she was the one who bumped into her, while the dark-haired sister screams that juice was thrown on her. As the dark-haired sister stays on the floor to act like a victim, a blonde noblewoman steps forward and calls out to Faustina. This blonde noblewoman mocks Faustina, saying she's repeating the same thing and clearly never learns her lesson. Elvira cries out about how cruel her sister is, which makes Faustina realize this is a repeat of her past. Elvira claims Faustina was just jealous of her dress, and this really gets the other guests gossiping. Faustina is frustrated that Elvira is causing trouble today, since Prince Bernhard's birthday party is such an important event. Faustina asks Elvira if she is okay, but points out that Elvira bumped into her, while she secretly vows to handle things differently this time. Faustina reveals that she is the Duke's daughter, and that she is currently living her life for a second time. She remembers how in her first life, her younger sister Elvira managed to steal her fiancé, Crown Prince Bernhard, away from her. Faustina looks back on her first life, remembering how she let jealousy take over and made Elvira's life a living nightmare. It got so dark that she actually tried to kill her sister, and even though she's determined to be better this time, things are spiraling anyway. She can still feel the sting of being kicked out of her family's house as punishment for her past crimes. In the present, she watches in shock as people rush over and call for Elvira, wondering why the exact same disaster is happening all over again. Elvira cries out for her mother, who immediately hugs her and tells her she's a poor thing for having to go through this. Finally, Faustina's mother turns her anger toward Faustina and demands to know the meaning of what she's done. Elvira tells a total lie, claiming Faustina bumped into her from behind and spilled juice on her, making Faustina gasp in shock at her sister's words. The mother ignores the truth and focuses on Elvira, saying they should go somewhere else so she can change her dress before she gets sick. With a cold, sharp look in her eye, the mother says she has thought about what happened. She tells Faustina that even if Elvira is actually at fault, Faustina is the one who is going to be the crown princess. She demands that Faustina start acting like someone in that important role, but Faustina just stands there without saying a word. Faustina thinks about how hard she's been working to not mess up like last time, even trying to break off her engagement just to stay out of trouble. Faustina dances with Prince Bernhard, but her eyes show she's feeling a bit overwhelmed and her heart is racing. She admits she might have been getting carried away earlier, but thinks that perhaps, this time for sure, she can make this work. Seeing how happy they are together, she starts to believe that things could actually go well with Prince Bernhard. She feels like maybe even the goddess is sending her a message that things are finally going her way. Back at the garden party, the noble guests are all standing around the tables enjoying the food and the beautiful scenery. The party host welcomes the crowd, thanking everyone for coming and telling them all to enjoy the event to the fullest. Today, Faustina is at a fancy tea party hosted by the queen, looking lovely in her floral headpiece and lacy dress. She hangs out by the food table alone, trying to remember if this party ever happened in her past life, but she has no memory of it. When she tries a tasty snack, she's surprised and wonders if these treats weren't around the first time. She's so happy munching on the sweets that she decides to have just one more, but then she hears someone calling her name. It's Prince Bernhard, and he gives her a big smile and a wave, which makes Faustina really nervous to see him. She realizes she can't avoid him anymore, even though she's been turning down his offers to meet ever since the birthday party. Faustina is really nervous that things might turn out like her past life, but she manages to apologize for avoiding the prince when he came to visit. Bernhard says it's no big deal and asks how her health is, and she promises him she's doing much better now. He gets a huge, happy smile on his face and says he's so relieved to hear that. Faustina is totally caught off guard by his kind reaction and can feel herself starting to blush. Bernhard then tells her that he actually has someone special he wants to introduce to her today. A cute young girl appears with a friendly smile, saying that plenty of other people are carrying the same thing too. Faustina is formally introduced to the second prince, Nej, who politely tells her he is pleased to meet her. Nej gives her a bright smile and mentions he has heard plenty about her from his brother and mother, which catches Faustina totally off guard. Looking at him, Faustina thinks about how she used to find Prince Nej cute as a child, but now she sees him as a beautiful and cool adult. Prince Bernhard steps in to ask Nej if he is dressed too lightly for the outdoors, and Nej wonders if that is really the case. Bernhard insists on having someone bring a lap blanket for him, even though Nej laughs and tells him he worries way too much. Bernhard says his concern is only natural and then turns his attention back to Faustina to speak with her. Faustina watches him and thinks to herself that she's seeing a side of her brother she doesn't usually get to see. Prince Bernhard wraps a warm shawl around the cheerful girl and tells them how happy he is to see them both getting along again. While they're talking, someone else approaches to greet His Highness, and the prince tells them to go ahead. Seeing that he's busy, Faustina politely excuses herself and says they should talk again later. She's actually really excited to finally go back and eat more of those cookies she liked so much. But as she walks away to find her snacks, a mystery girl in a fancy dress watches her from the distance. Faustina recognizes the newcomer as Lady Ilia, from a powerful noble family. In her past life, this woman was her big rival and the second choice for the role of crown princess. While Faustina thinks about how she only has bad memories of her, Ilia suddenly walks up and calls her by name. Ilia politely asks how she's doing today, which leaves Faustina feeling quite surprised. Ilia just stands there with a calm look, waiting for a response. Faustina is confused because this should be their first real meeting, yet Ilia is acting like they've known each other for a long time. Faustina stands there wondering how she should even respond to her old rival while they stare each other down in silence. She decides to be direct, greeting Ilia, but quickly adding that her skin looks just as pale and unhealthy as it ever has. Ilia is completely caught off guard when Faustina bluntly suggests that if she's feeling so sick, she might as well just go home. Faustina remembers that in her past life, Ilia avoided the sun to look like the type of woman the prince liked, which led to many mean comments about her being unhealthy. Faustina wonders why Ilia is even outside today, but Ilia just smiles and thanks her for the concern, saying she's surprised Faustina noticed, since she usually looks so blank. Ilia follows up with another jab, saying she always figured Faustina's eyes were just for show and didn't actually work. Faustina and Ilia face off with a literal spark between them, both wearing competitive smirks as they size each other up. Ilia's expression softens into a knowing look as she wonders to herself if her hunch is right. Faustina is totally caught off guard, realizing that Ilia might be in the exact same situation as her. Faustina asks Ilia if she also remembers everything from the last time, just as a loud scream echoes through the room. A memory flashes back to a girl with dark pigtails looking upset because her dress is covered in stains while two boys stand by. Faustina's eyes go wide because she recognizes the scene perfectly, realizing she's seen this all before. At a fancy garden party, a polite blonde boy in a uniform and a girl named Elvira, with dark wavy hair, are happily chatting away. But out of nowhere, juice gets splashed all over Elvira's dress, and Faustina realizes this tea party is a perfect match for something that happened in her past life. She looks back at the memory of her younger self and realizes she was actually the one who ruined Elvira's dress that day. Back in the real world, Faustina suddenly feels really sick and clutches her chest, while Ilia calls out her name in worry. Everything starts to fade for Faustina as she collapses, thinking about how history seems to be repeating itself. A man in a patterned coat gently picks up the fainted Faustina and is told to carry her away carefully, while Ilia looks on. Ilia looks around and wonders where Lord Cain and the rest of the group have gone, only to learn that he is busy keeping Lady Elvira company. As Ilia stands alone, a hand reaches out and a voice asks her to come away for a moment so they can talk in private. The person tells her not to be so guarded, but Ilia makes it clear that staying calm and trusting them is completely impossible. Ilia turns to look at him with a sharp expression and says she hasn't forgotten even one thing that he has done to her. The person she is confronting is Prince Nej, who watches her with a quiet, thoughtful look. Prince Nej says she's making him sound like a bad guy, but then he admits that his actions probably were wrong by most standards. Ilia reflects on the past, thinking about how some people really did end up unhappy while everything was going on. Prince Nej claims that those hard times led to everyone being happy in the end, but Ilia immediately questions if that was actually the case. Thinking back to their previous lives, she asks him why things had to turn out that way if they were all supposed to be happy. Ilia admits the whole situation was a shock to her too, explaining that even though she loves her brother, things got complicated. She confesses that in just one single moment, he became the person she hated more than anyone else in the whole world. She makes it very clear who she is talking about by saying the name of the man right in front of her, Prince Nij. Faustina looks really worried, thinking about what might happen if her engagement to Prince Bernhard is called off, and wondering if she can get a promise that the past won't repeat itself. Outside, the large mansion looks peaceful under the bright sky. Back in her room, someone asks if she'd like a drink to help her relax. Linsu, her maid, even offers to bring some flowers to brighten the mood, but Faustina just calls her name, clearly lost in thought. She tells Linsu there's no need to fuss over her, leaving the maid looking a bit flustered as she tries to explain herself. In the end, Faustina just asks for something light to read, and Linsu is happy to go grab it for her. Linsu happily heads off to the library to find just the right book for her. Once the door shuts with a soft click, Faustina is left all alone sitting on her bed. She begins to worry, thinking about how she has already fainted twice now. Looking away, she feels certain that her engagement is definitely going to be cancelled because of her health, but she tells herself it's fine, and that this outcome is exactly what she wanted. Even so, she can't help but think back to Prince Bernhard and the kind way he looks at her. Faustina looks down, her face filled with worry as she tries to process everything. She starts to get really flustered, touching her face and hiding her eyes as she grows more and more annoyed with her own thoughts. Faustina suddenly stops as she realizes that even though things were a mess, Lady Aelia definitely has memories of the past, so she knows she has to find out the truth. Later, Faustina arrives at a fancy house and politely thanks her host for inviting her over for the day. She sits down to talk, looking quite nervous as she addresses Lady Aelia. She's so on edge that she accidentally bites her tongue mid-sentence, causing Lady Aelia to let out a little chuckle. Aelia gives a gentle smile and says the pleasure is truly all hers. Faustina lets out a quiet sigh, thinking that while she didn't expect an invite, this meeting is actually very convenient for her. Faustina knows there is something she has to ask, so she asks Alia if she's really the same woman she remembers, leaving the noblewoman asking for a bit more detail. Faustina gets straight to the point and reminds Alia that she was the one obsessed with becoming the crown princess in the past. Alia simply agrees, which confirms Faustina's suspicion that the noblewoman also has memories of their previous life. It finally sinks in for Faustina that they are both reliving their lives from the very beginning. Alia asks Faustina exactly what she remembers, and Faustina says she has the general idea, but some of the details are missing. She thinks back to her fiancé, Prince Bernhard, and how he was always with her younger sister, Elvira. It turns out he fell in love with her sister, which ended up getting their engagement cancelled. Faustina admits she tried to kill her sister because she was so jealous, but she failed and got kicked out of her house, only avoiding a trial because her father and the queen stepped in. Alia stays quiet while Faustina mentions that after being sent away, she spent some time living at an inn. When Alia asks what happened after the inn, Faustina just looks down and explains that she can't remember a single thing past that moment. Alia cuts right to the chase and asks Faustina if she actually knows how her life ended. Faustina admits she has no clue, so Alia nods and says she finally understands the situation. It's hard for Faustina to process, and while she expected it, hearing someone say out loud that she died is still really upsetting. She decides she wants to keep moving forward though, so she calls out to Lady Aelia while looking at the plate of snacks. Faustina works up her courage and begs Lady Aelia to tell her the real reason why she died in her past life. Aelia looks at her for a moment before closing her eyes and admitting that she actually doesn't know either. Lady Aelia admits she only knows what happened through rumors, which leaves Faustina sounding a bit confused. Faustina realizes it makes sense since they weren't close back then, and their lives as daughters of a duke and a marquis were just too different. Looking down at the tea table, Faustina feels a bit lost because it seems like she might never find out how she actually died. Lady Aelia mentions how Faustina just vanished and offers to at least share what happened to the people around her after she was gone. This makes Faustina light up again as she claps her hands together and says she really wants to hear all about it anyway. Aelia explains that the marriage between the crown prince and Faustina's sister finally happened a year later, once she finished her school. Lady Aelia explains that around that same time, Faustina's older brother inherited the family title and officially became the new duke. Faustina is super proud of her brother, while Aelia mentions that their parents, the former duke and duchess, retired and moved back to their own territory. Faustina feels a bit worried because even though her brother is smart, she thinks it must have been really hard for him to handle all those big duties all by himself. Aelia admits she doesn't know the exact reasons why it happened so fast, and Faustina just quietly accepts that while nibbling on a snack. Faustina then turns the conversation around and asks Lady Aelia what ended up happening with her own life back then. Azealia looks down at her tea and calmly reveals that she was eventually married off to become one of the crown prince's wives. Faustina is completely frozen in shock, her eyes wide with total disbelief at what she is hearing. She can barely process the news, realizing that someone had to step in and handle all the official work because her sister wasn't doing her job. Faustina finds it hard to believe the proud Lady Aelia ended up as a consort, wondering if even that role was just a cover for Elvira's mistakes. Looking down sadly, Faustina explains how their mother spoiled Elvira and let her skip her studies, leaving the family house at fault and making her feel deeply sorry as her sister. Aelia sits back on her fancy chair and calmly asks if she can change the subject to ask Faustina a question of her own. She brings up a memory of the light-haired noble and reminds Faustina of how poorly the prince treated her, questioning why she would ever stay as his fiancée after all that. Aelia explains that since she has fainted twice now, her engagement is going to be cancelled, which leaves Faustina processing the news and realizing what it means. Aelia watches her closely and points out that if the engagement is really ending, then she wonders why Faustina has such a heartbreakingly sad look on her face. Faustina trails off, clearly struggling to put her complicated feelings into words. She looks back on her past life and remembers how she truly loved Prince Farid for 11 long years. With a sad smile, she admits it is just not that easy to wipe away feelings that have been stuck in your heart for such a long time. Faustina realizes that everything happening now feels exactly like it did in her past life. Aelia reminds her that no matter how much Prince Varid disliked her back then, Faustina would always chase after him. Faustina points out that Prince Varid and Elvira seem to be naturally drawn to each other without even trying. She worries that history will just repeat itself, and the prince might cancel their engagement just to get her out of the way, since those two are surely meant to be. In her mind, it is clear that they are simply destined lovers. Aelia repeats the word destiny with a doubtful look before turning her attention back to Faustina. Aelia gets straight to the point and asks her friend if she actually has any intention of becoming the next crown princess. Faustina doesn't skip a beat and calmly replies that she has no interest in that at all. Aelia goes quiet for a second to digest that answer, while Faustina takes a slow sip of her tea. Aelia points out that even if the prince and Elvira are supposed to be destined lovers, it is pretty unlikely that Elvira will be chosen as his fiancée again. She adds that the next person in line will definitely be Faustina, and though she's Elvira's sister and can't fully support it, she apologizes for suddenly being so talkative. Hearing this, Faustina starts choking on her drink in shock and makes it very clear she is officially done with wanting to be the crown princess. Faustina is totally stunned and blurts out that she never even liked the crown prince in the first place, then quickly asks for a handkerchief. Aelia is completely confused because she remembers how obsessed Faustina used to be with the engagement and how she used to harass her every single time they saw each other. Faustina doesn't back down and snaps that the bad feelings were mutual back then anyway. Looking totally over it, Faustina flips her hair and says she has no interest in being crown princess, declaring that the Laris family is going to turn it down because they aren't marrying into royalty. It's a known fact that marrying into the royal family is a huge win for any noble house. But despite that, she's clearly done with the idea. Still can't wrap her head around it, and asks what she's thinking, pointing out that everyone knows how hard Faustina has been studying for this very goal. Snaps back that it's her line, and demands to know why Faustina is still doing queen training if she has no plans to take the throne, leaving Faustina speechless. Faustina looks away and claims she just didn't want to be rude to the queen, who spends so much time on her, but she secretly knows the real truth. She admits to herself that she's probably just lonely, and treats the queen like the perfect mother she's always wanted because she's so hungry for affection. She remembers thinking that if she just kept trying her absolute best, her own mother would finally say something nice to her. Faustina was convinced that by working this hard, the prince would finally have no choice but to acknowledge her as his real fiancée. Aelia looks on as Faustina admits that's just what she used to believe, thinking back to how Faustina looked in those old days. Faustina grips her dress and admits she still can't forget the past before looking over at Aelia. Aelia stares back at her in silence, looking completely surprised by what she's hearing. Faustina turns her head and firmly says she won't be the crown princess and has no interest in it anymore. Aelia points out she already heard that just a second ago, which leaves Faustina looking a bit flustered. As Olia laughs, Faustina asks if she's really the same person because she seems so different from how she used to be. Faustina tells her that's actually her own line, but she trails off as if she has more on her mind. Ilia watches Faustina closely, wondering if this is finally the real her, since it's the first time she's ever seen her give a genuine smile from the heart. She thinks Faustina is so beautiful in this moment that not even the rarest jewels or flowers could compare to her. Faustina gives a warm, happy smile and wonders if showing this side of herself to Prince Bernhard in their past life would have led to a different future. She quickly drops the idea with a blank look, reminding herself that the prince only ever cared about Elvira, so things wouldn't have changed anyway. Turning back to Alia, Faustina says that while they don't know why they both have these old memories, it must mean they share a special connection. Finally, Faustina looks Alia right in the eye with a hopeful expression and asks if they could try being real friends now. Alia looks on while Faustina admits that it might sound weird, but she feels like she didn't have many real friends back in the day. Alia doesn't hold back and tells Faustina that no one was weird enough to want to be friends with someone as intense as she used to be. Faustina tells her to stop being mean and rubbing salt in old wounds, but Alia just says she is telling the truth. The mood lightens up instantly as the two of them look at each other and share a light laugh. Alia finally gives in and says that being around Faustina now, that they aren't rivals, actually sounds like it could be fun. Hearing that really touches Faustina, and she gives a warm, sweet smile. Alia makes a small sound of surprise as she starts looking over a paper in her hands. Sitting up in bed, Alia realizes she kept a big secret and never told Faustina the real reason she died in her past life. She's hard on herself, thinking she really should have just been honest and said it right then. Even with that regret, she wonders if Faustina suspects her brother and Lady Elvira are being drawn to each other again. She decides she will lead her brother to believe that Elvira is a much better fit for him than Faustina is. With a dark, knowing smile, Alia tells herself that the two of them are destined lovers after all. Faustina sits down with her father and asks him what this big, important talk is all about. Her father looks pretty nervous and asks her to stay calm and listen carefully, which just makes her even more confused. He then drops a total bombshell, telling her that the engagement to the crown prince is actually going to continue and won't be cancelled after all. The shock is so much that Faustina starts swaying on the sofa, making her father freak out and ask if she's all right. She just sits there in a daze, repeating the words back to herself as she tries to process the fact that her engagement isn't being broken off. She looks up with a stunned expression, her eyes wide as the news finally starts to sink in. Faustina screams in total shock, reminding herself that she is currently the daughter of a duke. You see, the big secret is that she actually has all the memories from her very first life. In that past life, her sister Elvira stole her fiancé away, and Faustina tried to kill her out of jealousy but failed. Because of that mistake, she was kicked out of her family's house and ended up dying. Her only goal this time around was to get her engagement cancelled quickly and quietly, but that wish is falling apart. Stunned and sweating, she tries to protest to Faustina's father, unable to accept what's happening. Faustina tells her dad she's lost all her confidence and is worried she'll faint again, insisting that keeping the engagement is a huge mistake. Looking quite sad, her father tells her he really does understand how she's feeling. He explains that he has already asked the king to call it off many times, but his request wasn't granted. However, he says they reached a deal where if her health stays poor, her engagement will be moved to the second prince, Prince Nij, which leaves her totally shocked. Faustina can't believe she might be sent to Prince Nij, thinking about how she was only picked for Crown Prince Bernhard because she looks like the goddesses the people worship. This is all because of an old agreement that says any girl born as a reborn goddess must marry someone in the royal family, no matter what. Faustina points out that if she marries the second prince, her health issues won't be such a big deal, and her father adds that he's even arranged for her to stop her queen training for now. He mentions that she has probably been pushing herself way too hard and tells her she really needs to take it easy for a while. While sitting quietly, Faustina wonders why they don't just switch her engagement to Prince Nij immediately if he is an acceptable choice. She thinks about how many times her father had to ask for this change and starts to worry about what the king might actually be planning. Her father then interrupts her thoughts to hand her a letter that just arrived from Prince Bernhard. Later that night at the manor, Faustina can't get any rest and keeps tossing and turning in bed with so much on her mind. Faustina stretches and yawns as she wakes up, realizing that today is finally her 8th birthday. She looks over a book titled The Many Trials of Faustina, and realizes that since there's no party this year, her knowledge from her past life is kind of useless. As a duke's daughter, she explains that she actually remembers everything that happened in her first life. Back then, Her sister Elvira stole her fiancé, and after a failed attempt to kill her out of jealousy, Faustina was kicked out of her home and died. This time, her goal is a simple, peaceful breakup, and she remembers that the gift from the prince last time was just a plain white ribbon. She thinks the gift was just something cute and safe, figuring that since Prince Bernhard hated her back then, he probably didn't even pick it out himself. Faustina thinks back to how much she loved wearing her dress in her past life, but she can't help feeling that white is a color meant only for her sister, Elvira. She sighs that the look just doesn't suit her anymore, only to be interrupted by a sudden sound at her door. Her maid, Linsu, walks into the room and is completely shocked to find her lady already wide awake and out of bed. With a huge, bright smile, Linsu wishes her a happy birthday and tells her congratulations on the big day. Faustina looks calm and content as she sits there, taking in the sweet morning energy from her maid. Just then, her father steps inside to say good morning to the staff and gives a warm greeting to his daughter, calling her Fauna. Faustina's father wishes her a happy birthday, and she's thrilled as she thanks him for the cute, giant duck plushie he gave her. Her brother steps up next to congratulate her, and as she takes his gift, she wonders if it's a book. He teases her by saying, "The book is about how a lady should act," which makes Faustina let out a frustrated groan. Seeing her reaction, he laughs and pats her head, telling her he was just kidding and actually got her something she'd really like. Suddenly, Faustina is caught off guard when she hears someone calling out her name. She turns to see her mother standing there, ready to give her another birthday present. Faustina's mother looks a little unsure of herself as she starts to speak up. She wishes Faustina a happy birthday and hands over a box, telling her it's totally fine if she decides not to use it. Faustina politely says thank you, but she's worried since her mother usually forces her own flashy pink style on her. Her brother suggests she open it right away and offers to hold her other gifts for her. When she opens the box, she's stunned to see a beautiful, simple flower hair clip inside. Faustina is speechless. And Faustina's mother explains she noticed her old clip broke at a recent tea party and wanted to get her a new one. Faustina's mother looks a bit shy as she explains that she searched for a gift similar to the one Faustina liked before. Faustina's mother helps her put the ornament in, and when Faustina nervously asks how she looks, her mother confirms it's a perfect fit. Her mother tells her it suits her really well, but seeing this soft side of her makes Faustina realize just how long it's been since they were this close. As Faustina's mother reaches out to touch her face, Faustina is moved by the fact that it's been forever since her mother looked at her with such a gentle gaze. Faustina looks up with a sweet, happy blush and gives her mother a heartfelt thank you for the gift. Faustina's mother is completely stunned by the cute reaction and ends up turning away in total shock. Faustina looks around with a confused expression, as if something unexpected just happened. A cheerful maid suddenly calls out that a gift arrived from the castle, so Faustina says she's coming to take a look. Meanwhile, a kind man holds a stuffed duck toy, while the crying lady next to him starts wiping away happy tears. Faustina wonders if the prince sent her another ribbon as she carefully picks up the small gift box. When she opens it, she's surprised to see that the ribbon is a totally different color than the usual ones. The dark-haired boy stands by her and points out that the deep blue color perfectly matches the prince's own eyes. The dark-haired boy thinks about how some things still turn out exactly like they did the last time, even if he tries to do things differently. Faustina looks at her gift and realizes that there are definitely some things that have changed this time around. When the butler with glasses announces that breakfast is ready, the dark-haired boy immediately asks where Elvira is. The maid explains that Elvira won't be coming down because she's feeling a little sick this morning. Poor Elvira is actually wide awake and clutching her teddy bear, upset because she had that same scary dream again today. She remembers calling out for help in her nightmare, but a mysterious girl just stood there and smiled the whole time while she cried. Elvira thinks back to the very first time she saw Lord Bernhard and how much that moment meant to her. She vividly remembers his unique silver hair with its purple tint and his striking blue eyes. It was love at first sight, and she felt like a bolt of lightning had just struck her heart. Because he is so kind and reliable, Elvira is certain that Lord Bernhard will eventually come to her rescue. However, things didn't go her way, and her sister Faustina ended up being chosen as his future wife instead. She's incredibly frustrated and throws her toy, crying out that she is the one who loves him more. Elvira is super determined to steal Lord Bernhard's heart, convinced her love is way deeper than her sister's. In their country, there's a big tradition where you head to the church for a special blessing on your birthday. Faustina is really happy because today she gets to have a special outing with just her mom and dad. While they're traveling, her parents notice she's staring out the window and mention a woman named Ava used to do the same thing. Faustina is curious and asks about this lady Ava, while her parents suddenly look a bit awkward and uneasy. They explain that Ava was actually her father's cousin and was known for being a truly beautiful woman. Hearing her parents talk about Lady Ava in the past tense, Faustina's heart sinks as she realizes the woman has already passed away. Her father explains that she was beautiful, inside and out, but she unfortunately dealt with some really obsessive and creepy followers. Faustina stays quiet, processing the news that Ava actually had to flee the royal capital to live somewhere far away. Her father then shakes off the heavy topic and lets her know they'll be arriving at their destination soon. When they arrive, they're greeted by a priest with a very kind and gentle smile. Looking at him, Faustina remembers being told that she was brought into this world for a purpose and that the gods truly love her. Faustina bows her head in prayer as a blessing is spoken, wishing for her to live with faith and find plenty of success. Inside her heart, she asks the goddesses to cancel her engagement quickly and has one more wish on her mind. She hopes that the prince and Elvira will finally be united, wishing them well as she heads off. Faustina stays silent for a moment until the priest calls out her name, causing her to stop and look down. The priest gently takes her hand and offers a warm smile, wishing for her to have a very happy year. Faustina can only stare up at the priest, feeling surprised by his kind words. Faustina's father looks a bit tired and asks if the blessing is finally finished. They confirm that everything is done and decide it is time to head back home together. The priest offers to walk them to their carriage, but Faustina's father politely says it isn't necessary to bother a busy man like him, while her mother calls her over to join them. Faustina glances back one last time and sees the priest waving at her with a gentle smile as she walks away. By the time they arrive back at their massive estate, it's already late into the night. Faustina dives onto her comfy bed and cheers about how her special day was just wonderful. Faustina thinks this year was her best birthday yet, since she got a ton of presents and even had 2 cakes at dinner, including a special apple pie her friend Linsu suggested. She can't stop thinking about the kind priest and the way he looked at her earlier that day. Just as she's wondering if his eyes were trying to tell her something more, there's a knock at her door, and someone calls out to her. It's her butler Volt, who's standing there with a tea tray and a calm smile. He explains that he brewed some herbal tea to help her sleep well, though he asks if she was already getting ready for bed. Faustina happily thanks him and says she'll gladly have a cup since he went to the trouble of making it for her. Faustina falls into a deep sleep, completely unaware of what is about to happen next. Volt carries her through the dark, and we hear a quiet click as a door shuts behind them. He places her into a wooden crate and reminds the others that even though the drugs will keep her asleep, they still need to be gentle with her. The man by the wagon says he gets it, noting that the girl looks exactly like Lady Ava. Volt just stares down in silence, looking like he might be having second thoughts about his actions. The driver is not in the mood to wait around and tells Volt to just hurry up and jump in the back of the wagon. A mysterious man pulls off a dark wig to reveal his long, light hair and brushes things off with a casual comment. He finds it truly wonderful whenever the timeline starts to shift. Back at the castle, a young girl named Nij asks her brother if he is doing all right. Her brother calls out her name and tells her he's fine, while Nij gives a small, knowing smile. Nij notes that everyone is out searching for Lady Faustina, the Duke's daughter who was kidnapped 2 nights ago. The young prince explains that Faustina is his brother Bernhard's fiancée, and she's reliving her life with memories of the past, just like he is. Nij thinks about how the kidnapping happened when Faustina was 17 in the last life, so the prince is likely scared since things are different now. She acts all sweet to comfort him, calling the girl a poor thing and saying that the goddess will surely protect her. The young prince looks really worried as he suggests they should pray for her safe return, but secretly, Nij is loving the chaos, thinking it's delightful that the order of events has shifted from the previous timeline. With a creepy look on her face, she admits to herself that she actually feels like laughing out loud at the situation. She realizes that while Bernhard was old enough to save her at 17 in the last life, this time it's basically impossible. The black-haired maid explains that even though it's a secret, the royal family and Faustina's family are searching, so they will find her eventually, but she worries something might happen in the meantime, which catches Prince Nej's attention. Suddenly, Prince Nij calls out to the wavy-haired priest as he sees him walking by the windows. The wavy-haired priest seems surprised to see him and greets Prince Nij as the boy runs up to say hello. Prince Nij thinks to himself that the man seems really tired, even if he sounds calm, but the priest just smiles and tells him his timing is perfect. The boy tells the black-haired maid he needs to talk with the wavy-haired priest and asks her to leave them alone, which she does after being a bit surprised. Once they are alone, Prince Nij reaches out to grab the man's sleeve, making the priest wonder what the young prince needs from him. The short-haired girl gives the priest a very specific tip, telling him that Lady Faustina is being held prisoner on the 2nd floor of an inn called Piccolina down in the port town. While the short-haired girl flashes a knowing smile, The priest looks completely shocked and breaks into a sweat. He starts to ask who she really is, but she quickly cuts him off, insisting she isn't the one behind the kidnapping and has no reason to do something like that. After a moment of silence, the short-haired girl simply says, "Well," and tells the priest it's up to him whether he believes her or not. The priest remains quiet for a moment, looking troubled as he weighs the truth of her words. He thinks it over and realizes the info is too specific to be a lie, so he decides he's going to trust her. As the priest starts to walk away, the short-haired girl calls out to get his attention one last time. The short-haired girl just gives him a small, knowing smile before she heads off. Back at a grand mansion, the office is a total hive of activity, with people working hard to sort everything out. In the middle of the bustle, Kane looks completely drained and lost in his own worried thoughts. Suddenly, the dark-haired noblewoman places a hand on his shoulder and calls his name, causing Kane to look up and acknowledge his mother. The dark-haired noblewoman looks at him with a sad smile and tells him he looks like he's aged years in just the last 2 days. The dark-haired noblewoman reassures Kane that his father is doing everything he can to find Faustina, so he should just go to his room and wait for news. Kane quietly agrees and starts walking down the hall, looking completely worn out by everything that has happened. As he walks, he spots a maid named Linsu, who is busy moving a heavy stack of books. Kane asks if she is resting properly, but Linsu tells him that his concern for her is unnecessary. She says her only focus is finding the young lady quickly, and Kane can see the deep sadness in her eyes as they talk. Kane tries to tell her that none of this is her fault, but Linsu can't hold it back anymore and starts to cry. The blonde maid starts crying, worried about how scared and lonely Faustina must be feeling right now. But away from all the worry, Faustina is actually fast asleep and looks totally peaceful. The messy-haired man watches her, while the standing man asks if he used some super strong medicine, since she hasn't woken up for 2 whole days. The messy-haired man just says, it wasn't really anything that powerful. He keeps his eyes fixed on her, trying to figure out why she's still out cold. It turns out she is just having a massive food dream, muttering about apple pie, mushroom pie, and duck, while the guys look on, totally confused. Bolt walks into the room with a very serious look on his face, wearing his fancy floral vest. His mood flips instantly as he throws his arms out wide and happily shouts for Lord Arva. Suddenly, a knife whizzes right past his head and sticks into the wall, while a voice warns him to stay back. Lord Arva sits there calmly and explains that it would be a huge headache if Faustina woke up and started a fuss. He gives a cold, sharp look and simply calls out the name Volt to get his attention. Volt is left totally shocked and frustrated, staring at Arva while feeling completely insulted. Arva insults Volt for being a nameless orphan who doesn't know his place, questioning who even asked him to kidnap the Duke's daughter. Volt just clicks his tongue while his team calls him boss and says they need to finish the plan to escape the country. The tension stays high as they hide out in the quiet building. They agree to the next steps and tell the rest of the crew to keep a very close watch on the situation. The blonde maid gets told not to get any ideas just because Lord Arva is good-looking, but she snaps back that she isn't like the others. Through all the shouting and plotting, Faustina is still out cold and sleeping like a log. Arva leans his head on his hand and remarks that the person he's talking to seems to have just as much bad luck as he does. He vents about how he was actually targeted by some creep just because he has the same face as that Arva guy. The fake Volt explains that the man who worked for the Duke's house was actually just him in disguise, and not the real person at all. He admits that even though this will buy them a bit of time, they're bound to be caught sooner or later, but he's already planned some ways to deal with that. With a mysterious look, Arva quietly mentions the name Lord CL, as if he has something else on his mind. Meanwhile, Faustina finally starts to wake up, letting out a sleepy yawn before staring blankly into the room. Faustina jolts awake with a start and looks around the room in a panic, wondering where in the world she is. While she sits up in bed feeling totally lost, she suddenly hears a soft, mean laugh coming from nearby. Arva is sitting there with his arms crossed, telling her it's really too bad, but she has actually been kidnapped. As they lock eyes, Arva stays perfectly calm, while Faustina stares back at him with her eyes wide in total shock. Seeing her just sit there without moving a muscle, Arva can tell that he's made her completely freeze up. Faustina grips her dress tightly as she takes a breath, quietly saying she understands what is happening. Faustina looks at Arva and asks if he's a victim just like she is. Arva gives her a soft look and tells her that she has a really beautiful face. He asks if she was kidnapped because of her good looks, which leaves Faustina completely silent. She admits that while she planned to scream or run, being pitied is something she never expected. Faustina is confused about being taken in her sleep, so Arva explains how he outsmarted her guarding knight. Arva secretly decides to play along for now, while telling her that he was also threatened and brought there. Faustina introduces herself and asks the young man for his name. He gives her a small smile and tells her his name is Vered. Faustina repeats his name back to him, sounding like she's heard it before. She mentions that he feels familiar, which makes Vered wonder if she's serious. Sitting together on the bed, Faustina hugs her knees and wonders what will happen to them next. Vered points out that she'll likely be set free if it's just for a ransom, but he seems to have some doubts. Vered warns Faustina that she might be sold to someone really creepy who likes to hurt people, which leaves her totally terrified. He adds that because she looks so unique, she might even end up with a group of people who are obsessed with worshipping the goddess. Faustina clutches her head in a total panic, realizing she is in a truly desperate spot. She asks if there's any way for them to get away together, but Vered says he would have escaped ages ago if he could, and she has to admit he's right. While Vered stays quiet and watches her, she starts to worry that even if she is rescued, being a kidnapped girl will still be a huge problem for her. She looks down sadly, feeling certain that after all this, her engagement is definitely going to be cancelled. Vered looks completely stunned as he stares at her, a tiny drop of sweat rolling down his face. Faustina wonders if he's making the kind of face a child would, but she tells herself not to get any weird ideas just because Lord Arva is so good-looking. Vered lets out a small smile and admits he finally understands a little bit of how someone named Volt feels. Suddenly, a loud noise from outside makes them both jump, and they sit there in total shock. While Faustina shakes and asks what is happening, Vered realizes they have already been found. The poor girl is so overwhelmed that she breaks down in tears, her eyes squeezed shut as the fear takes over. A loud noise echoes as someone suddenly bursts through the door, calling out for Faustina. Faustina looks completely shocked, her eyes filling with tears as she experiences a strange feeling. She's stunned because, just for a moment, the young boy looks exactly like the man he will become in the future. You see, Faustina is a noble's daughter who happens to remember everything that happened in her previous life. In that life, her sister stole her fiancé, and after she failed to get revenge, she was kicked out and died, so she is doing everything to change her fate. Now her only goal is to find a way to end her engagement peacefully, so she can finally live a happy life. Faustina sits on the bed in a daze, clutching Vered's arm as she tries to make sense of what just happened. As someone shouts her name, Faustina holds her head in panic, realizing this kidnapping never happened in her previous life, and her future knowledge is failing her. Suddenly, Vered and the adult prince burst into the room together, both of them looking really tense and upset. Faustina's eyes go wide as she stares at them, wondering how she can be seeing both the young prince and his adult version at the same time. Vered tells her he's there to save her and asks if she's hurt, but Faustina is so shocked she can barely focus on him. She manages to say she's okay, but inside she's totally confused and wonders if she's just seeing things because this can't be right. Vered lets out a big sigh of relief and smiles, saying he is just so glad that everything is okay. Faustina is completely frozen in shock, her eyes wide as she tries to process what is happening. She wonders why His Highness is suddenly showing up here, but Vered snaps her back to reality by calling out her name. Standing next to her is a tall man with long dark hair who curiously asks who she might be. Faustina introduces him as Lord Vered and explains he was also kidnapped, while the man looks down and addresses her as a young lady. Vered notices her clothes are all wrinkled because she was gripping them too hard, and when she tries to nervously laugh and apologize, he tells her she cannot just giggle her way out of it. Someone asks if he is actually Crown Prince Bernhard, and he calmly confirms it, adding that he is also currently Faustina's fiancé. The kidnapper realizes the prince is telling the truth, but he quickly snaps at everyone to stay quiet. The jerk suddenly grabs young Vered, yelling that he is going to use the boy as a hostage so he can get away. Faustina screams out for the prince in a panic, while Bernhard just watches the man with a cold, silent look. In an instant, Bernhard gets behind the criminal and chokes him, allowing the young boy to scramble to safety. He shoves the boy further away and keeps the kidnapper pinned, letting out a tired sigh like this is all just a big chore. Faustina is completely shocked, her eyes wide as the kidnapper looks down at her with a grim expression. Prince Bernhard kneels before Faustina and says her name, sounding super relieved that she's safe. Faustina starts coughing from the shock and calls out for the prince in total surprise. Faustina tries to calm the young boy down, calling him Belle, while he continues to cry. Prince Bernhard stands tall and reminds her of the promise she made to never leave him. Vered apologizes to his uncle, while Faustina recognizes Lord Ciel the priest and wonders if the young boy is actually Vered. Everyone is a bit confused as a quiet moment of questioning hangs in the air. Lord Ciel stays silent for a moment before giving a warm smile and saying how happy he is that everyone is safe. Faustina nervously speaks up and calls out to the prince to get his attention. Faustina points out that Vered just called the priest his uncle, and while Vered is caught off guard, Lord Ciel says it is fine to tell her the truth, since it will come out eventually. Prince Bernhard explains that the priest is actually his father's younger brother. Faustina is shocked to realize Lord Ciel is royalty, but he clarifies that his mother was a commoner and he gave up his right to the throne long ago. Faustina is clearly a bit overwhelmed when the priest asks her to please just call him Ciel, and she stammers because she's not sure how to respond. Ciel gives a gentle smile and explains that he really doesn't like being called a prince anyway. Bernhard points out that regardless of his feelings, Ciel is still officially part of the royal family because there is no way the king would ever let him leave the registry. Bernhard then asks what Ciel's real connection is to his uncle, and while Ciel jokingly says they're total strangers, Bernhard knows that's impossible. Dropping the act, Ciel calmly explains that he and Vered actually met a long time ago when they were still children. He reveals that Vered helped him while he was living in the slums, and the two of them have been friends ever since. Bernhard looks doubtful and asks if an old friend like that just happened to be stuck in this prison. Vered brushes it off as a coincidence, but Faustina thinks the whole situation is really weird. Ciel moves on from the topic and speaks to Faustina instead. He asks her gently if she is feeling tired after everything that happened. Bernhard agrees she has had a scary time, and Ciel says she should rest, even though she tells them not to worry. Vered smirks and points out that she was actually fast asleep until just a moment ago. Vered catches Faustina off guard by revealing she was talking about pie in her sleep, which leaves her totally embarrassed as he asks what her dream was about. She admits she dreamed of eating a huge pile of pie and meeting a creature called Cold Duck, which makes Ciel and Bernhard think she's adorable, even while Vered teases her about her appetite. She gets a thoughtful look on her face as she continues to tell the story. According to her, the little duck would get angry and chase her whenever she tried to wake up, only stopping once she went back to eating pie. Vered asks if a tiny duck could really be that mean, but Ciel points out that the dream actually helped Faustina stay calm and forget her fears. Since it kept her from being scared, Bernhard says they should probably thank the little duck, and Faustina happily agrees. Bernhard thinks it is way too dangerous to ride horses this late at night, so he tells Faustina she should rest here for today, and he will escort her home in the morning. Faustina is worried her family might be panicking, but Bernhard reassures her that he already sent fast messengers to the Duke's house and the castle to say she is safe. Thinking about that makes Faustina feel much better, knowing her loved ones are probably breathing a sigh of relief by now. Now that the stress is gone, Faustina realizes she is actually starving, and Bernhard kindly offers to have a light snack prepared for her before bed. A nice little spread of tea and treats is soon brought out and set on the table in the lounge. Vered is super excited to dig in, but Bernhard grabs him by the back of his shirt and says he is coming with him instead. After a door slams and the yelling from the other room finally stops, a quiet, awkward silence fills the space between them. Bernhard looks at the snacks and asks if they should start eating, and a cheerful Faustina gives him a happy yes. As she enjoys a sandwich, Faustina can't stop thinking about the grown-up version of the prince she thought she saw earlier. She questions if her eyes were just playing tricks on her, or if she's actually seeing a memory from her past life. She realizes that if it's true, she must have been kidnapped in her past life too, and the prince was the one who rescued her. Faustina tells herself the idea is just impossible, but she's pulled back to reality when Bernhard suddenly calls her name. Ciel looks down with a sad expression, saying how awful everything must have been for her. Faustina is a bit surprised by his kindness and starts to blush as she listens. She tells him she's doing okay now, but Ciel stays worried and tells her not to push herself. Curious, Faustina asks the prince why he personally came all this way just to find her. A little attendant scolds Ciel for taking such big risks and says she was scared to death, which makes him apologize for the trouble. Ciel admits he followed his super strong uncle here, but Faustina still feels like he did way too much for her sake. Prince Ciel looks her right in the eyes and admits he was honestly really worried about her. Hearing her name, Faustina is caught completely off guard, and her eyes go wide with shock. After a moment of silence, Prince Ciel admits he was being reckless, realizing that if he got hurt, his uncle and the guards would be the ones taking the blame. He knows he's in trouble, and jokes that his father is definitely going to scold him once he gets back home. Faustina stays quiet and looks down as she thinks over everything the prince just shared. Finally, she nervously speaks up and calls out to him to get his attention. Faustina gives him a big smile and says she was so happy he came to save her, thanking him from the bottom of her heart. Looking at her on the couch, Prince Ciel is so shocked by how sweet she is that he can't even finish saying the word cute. He just stares at her while turning bright red, thinking to himself that she is honestly just too cute for words. Faustina is a bit confused by his weird face, and Prince Ciel suddenly jumps and tries to act normal again. Once things calm down, the two of them just look at each other and share a really sweet, quiet moment together. Meanwhile, In a different room, a man named Vered is having a glass of wine while sitting across from another guest. Vered looks pretty upset as he holds his wine glass, demanding to know why this man put Faustina in so much danger. The long-haired nobleman doesn't seem bothered at all, simply giving in with a smirk and saying he will explain. The story shifts back to Faustina, the Duke's daughter, during a quiet tea time with the prince. As she thinks about her own name, Faustina reveals her big secret. She actually remembers everything from her past life. Faustina politely addresses the prince, who gets a little shy while asking if she actually liked the ribbon he gave her for her birthday. She tells him it was a beautiful blue color just like his eyes, and Prince Ciel is clearly happy to hear she enjoyed it. Faustina blushes with a soft smile, thinking that this has turned out to be the absolute best birthday she has ever had. Prince Ciel is stunned when she mentions a gift from a previous time, so she clumsily waves her hands and says that while the kidnapping was awful, she is just glad he is safe now. She looks back on her memories of her past life, thinking about how the gifts from her mother and her fiancé, Prince Bernhard, felt like they were picked out without any real care back then. But this time is completely different, and she is really moved that both of them chose such wonderful gifts that show they were actually thinking of her. Holding her hands to her chest, she closes her eyes and feels a deep sense of happiness over how much things have changed for the better. After they sit in silence for a moment at the tea table, Prince Ciel clears his throat to get her attention so he can speak up again. Prince Ciel looks at her with a kind expression and wishes Faustina a happy birthday. Faustina is caught off guard, blushing and looking up at him with wide, happy eyes. Sitting across from each other with tea and sweets, she tells him that this has been her best birthday ever. Later on, Prince Ciel sits back and asks a man named Vered to tell him the full story from the very start. Vered smiles back and says he would be happy to explain everything to him. He begins the tale by mentioning that he first met the person known as the real Vault 8 years ago. Vered explains that because of rumors about how good he is with disguises, he was approached to take on the role of the Duke's butler. He goes on to say that for 7 whole years, he was the one known as Vault who served the Duke's household. Hearing this, Prince Ciel looks pretty serious and asks what this man named Vault was actually trying to achieve. Vered reveals that Vault was basically a fanatic who wanted to stay near Faustina because she is a total lookalike for someone named Arva. Vered takes a sip of his drink and wonders if this woman Arva was really as amazing as everyone seemed to think. Prince Ciel just looks away and says that Arva was actually just a normal, ordinary girl. Arva was a really shy and quiet girl who always hid behind her older sister, spending her days peacefully looking at flowers and animals. Even though she was so timid, she had this strange, almost magical charm that just drew people in. Between her beautiful red hair and those striking blue eyes, it didn't take long before every young man around was completely obsessed with her. Even this smiling noble with the wine glass admits that he was just as captivated by her beauty as everyone else. Because she was accidentally causing so many broken engagements, Arva's parents eventually decided to send her away to a very distant territory. Arva didn't seem to mind dropping out of the academy at all, since she was actually relieved to go live a free life in the countryside. But that wasn't the end of her story. The wavy-haired noble laughs as he mentions that some people were so obsessed they actually followed Arva all the way out to that faraway territory. He points out that Vault was definitely one of those people, and even though he's just a commoner, he actually attended the Noble Academy. The wavy-haired noble explains that Vault is the son of a big trading company president, which is where he got his money, and he used his mother's family name, Fuchs, as a cover. Hearing this, Prince Ciel finally understands that this secret connection is how Vault was able to sneak into the Duke's house. Prince Ciel asks what Vault is up to these days, only for the wavy-haired noble to reveal that the man bit a poison capsule hidden in his teeth and died. Prince Ciel takes a moment to think, and then directly asks if the wavy-haired noble was the one who provided that poison in the first place. Prince Ciel and the wavy-haired noble share a tense look, with the noble keeping a sly grin on his face. The wavy-haired noble admits that while Vault was a proud guy, deciding to end it all so quickly seems way too extreme. He suggests that maybe someone planted a specific idea in Vault's head to trick him into it. He explains that someone might have told Vault to play dead during the chaos by taking a drug that would just put him into a deep sleep. A piece of food is broken open, showing how easy it would be to hide a secret like that inside. Prince Ciel stays quiet and looks deep in thought, clearly realizing how suspicious this all sounds. The wavy-haired noble notes that Prince Ciel has a pretty unique way of eating bread, but Ciel just tells him to drop it. A bell rings, and a maid pops in to see what they need, so Prince Ciel orders another glass of wine and some cream soup. The wavy-haired noble brings up how CL used to love eating soup out of hollowed bread crusts, and CL smiles, saying it's like a fresh bread bowl. Shifting the mood, the wavy-haired noble tells the prince that he has a question he wants to ask him as well. He admits he knows Lord CL has his own followers to find info, but he's suspicious about how quickly the prince arrived and wants to know the reason. Prince CL stays quiet, looking completely caught off guard, as he remembers a mysterious woman with straight hair and bangs. Seal is puzzled about how Prince Nij knew where Faustina was, and why he'd even mention it, especially since Nij claims he wasn't part of the crime. He wants to ask him more once things calm down, but he doesn't expect a straight answer, just as a knock at the door interrupts his thoughts. A maid brings in the food and excuses herself, while the wavy-haired noble cheers up and says they should eat the soup while it's still hot. While Ciel holds his cup, the wavy-haired noble doesn't let him off the hook and asks for an answer to his earlier question. Ciel simply explains, "It's all thanks to having a great worshipper," leaving the wavy-haired noble to just nod along with a confused look. Meanwhile, a dark-haired lady in a fancy dress is thrilled to hear the news from a blonde gentleman that Fana has finally been rescued and is safe. Elvira is completely stunned and can't believe what she's just heard. The blonde gentleman pulls Elvira into a hug, feeling so thankful that the search is finally over. A maid decides to head off and give Elvira the official update on the situation. The maid asks the others to be really gentle with the little girl, because she's been through such a scary time. Fana sits quietly on the large bed, holding on to her stuffed bunny as she tries to feel safe again. Elvira explains that ever since her sister first vanished, her nightmares have been getting much worse. In her nightmare, someone tells her she's only good for one thing, even though she's doing her best, calling her an empty-headed child while something awful happens to her. The voice in the dream cruelly tells her that everything is all her fault. As a little girl in the dream, she holds her stuffed bunny tight, while a dark figure says she's to blame because she couldn't keep him by her side until the end. She groans in distress, crying out for help because she can't take the pain anymore and just wants her sister to come back home soon. Suddenly, a maid standing at the door calls out to Lady Elvira to get her attention. Elvira is completely shocked but relieved when she hears the incredible news that Lady Faustina has finally been found and is safe. Elvira's face lights up with pure joy as the weight of the news finally starts to sink in. The young Elvira can hardly believe it, but the maid gently tells her it is true and asks her to finally get some rest. Relieved, the little girl thanks goodness and begins to imagine what life will be like once her sister finally returns to the mansion. She holds onto her bunny plush, feeling sure that Lord Bernhard will come by for another visit soon. Somewhere else, a conversation starts up about what the future holds for a man named Vered. Vered looks a bit surprised when the blonde priest notes that he has no other place to go and offers him a room at the church. Vered has a really unsure look on his face as he processes everything that's being suggested. The blonde priest asks if he's willing to serve God, explaining that it would actually help him out in a lot of ways if Vered stayed. He sweetens the deal by promising that as long as Vered helps with a few requests now and then, he can do whatever he wants the rest of the time. Vered eventually gives in and says okay, though he secretly has a bad feeling that he's just going to be completely overworked. Setting his spoon down, Vered announces he's heading to sleep, so the blonde priest tells him he can use the guest room in the front. Vered makes his way out of the room and pushes open the heavy doors to finally find his bed for the night. Lord Seal stops for a moment and asks if it's okay for him to say just one more thing before they finish. Vered starts to ask why the man went to so much trouble for all of this, but he quickly catches himself and stops. He changes his mind and asks instead what Lord Seal actually planned to do with Elvira. Vered keeps a serious look on his face while he waits for a real answer from the priest. Lord Seal just stares back and says that the answer should be obvious. Vered then explains that his whole goal was always to deliver the girl right to Lord Seal. Vered gives a knowing smirk, looking like he's got a secret plan of his own. Vered admits that if he had actually done that, things would be different, while Lord Seal listens with a serious look. During tea time, Lord Seal asks Elvira if she was able to see the rest of her dream, catching her by surprise while she's eating. Elvira just gives him a big, sweet smile, looking really happy and relaxed. Lord Seal looks down with a pretty serious face, almost as if something is weighing on him. Elvira notices his change in mood and watches him with a quiet, curious look in her eyes. Faustina wakes up in a fancy bed and slowly remembers she's at the church, reminding herself she's actually a duke's daughter. But she's not just any noble girl, because she actually has all the memories from her previous life. Even with that knowledge, she feels like the past few days have been a complete whirlwind of events. Everything started going sideways on her 8th birthday, right after her family and her fiancé, Prince Bernhard, gave her a bunch of wonderful gifts. That very same night, a man in glasses snatched her from her room while she was fast asleep. She eventually woke up in a room she didn't recognize, and a man named Lord Veled told her she had been unconscious for 2 full days. Faustina remembers how Sir Ciel, the priest, and Prince Bernhard all rushed to save her right away. Since it got dark on the way back to the royal capital, they ended up stopping to rest at the church for the night. She thinks about how scary the whole thing was, but she is so glad that Prince Bernhard was the one who came to her rescue. She smiles to herself, remembering how happy she felt getting to talk with the prince for so long last night. But then she starts worrying that a girl who was kidnapped is not fit to be a future princess, which means her engagement might be over. Surprisingly, she thinks to herself that everything is actually going exactly according to her secret plan. Faustina remembers that in her past life, her fiancé Prince Bernhard fell in love with her sister Elvira instead of her. This is why her big goal this time is to find a way to cancel their engagement as early as she can. She thinks the prince doesn't hate her yet because she hasn't bullied her sister this time, but his kindness is so different that she almost confuses it for something more. She quickly shuts that thought down, telling herself she simply can't let that happen. In her mind, Prince Bernhard and Elvira are meant for each other, and she's certain those two absolutely have to be together. She stays silent for a long moment, looking confused and lost in her own thoughts about what to do. Faustina holds her head in frustration, wondering why she ever thought things were destined to be a certain way. She recalls a powerful bond known as the Thread of Fortuna and wonders if this is a piece of a memory coming back from her past life. This thread represents a connection made by the goddess of fate that is so strong no blade could ever cut it. She hears a voice in her head saying there was never any room for her from the very start, but she just can't remember who told her that. Sitting alone in her large bed, Faustina stays quiet as she lets these confusing thoughts sink in. Finally, she claps her hands together and tells herself she absolutely has to stop overthinking all of this. Faustina pumps her fist and decides there is no use worrying about stuff she doesn't understand, so even though it's still dark out, she's going to get dressed and go for a walk. After getting ready, she steps out of her room, only to bump into someone waiting right outside the door. She looks up in surprise and realizes the person standing there is actually Sir Ciel. Noticing that his hair is still dripping wet, she wonders to herself if he just got out of the bath. Sir Ciel asks if she had trouble sleeping since she is up so early, and as she greets him, she feels a bit flustered seeing how many buttons he has left undone on his shirt. Standing so close to him, Faustina is suddenly distracted by just how lovely he smells. Sir Ciel notices her looking and asks if she's curious about what he has. He explains that they're bath salts and offers to share some, which makes Faustina wonder if that's really okay. He gives her a really warm smile and tells her that of course he doesn't mind at all. Then he invites her to come in, saying he'll brew her a fresh cup of tea. Once inside, they find Lord Veled lounging back on a fancy sofa with his feet up, looking totally relaxed. Faustina greets him and asks if he's awake early as well, but Lord Veled just lazily tells her that he was actually sleeping. Lord Veled admits that Sir Ciel woke him up just to act as her playmate, which leaves Faustina wondering if the two are actually best friends. Everyone sits together as Faustina watches Sir Ciel work and asks if he usually makes the tea himself. Sir Ciel explains that he prefers to handle most things on his own, as he hands her a steaming cup. Faustina accepts the drink with a bright smile and gives him a polite thank you. She finds the fruity and floral scent absolutely delicious, and Sir Ciel smiles and says he is happy she likes it. The taste is so amazing that Faustina feels like a whole garden of flowers just bloomed inside her mouth. Faustina is totally enjoying her tea while Sir Ciel and Lord Veled watch her, but Sir Ciel seems to have something on his mind as he stares. Looking at Faustina, Sir Ciel suddenly looks completely shocked and breaks into a cold sweat, as if he's just seen a ghost. Lord Veled notices something is off and calls out to Sir Ciel, while Faustina looks up, wondering why the mood changed so fast. Sir Ciel quickly jumps up from his seat, making a sudden excuse that there were some cookies and he's going to go grab them. The door slams shut behind him with a loud thud, leaving Faustina feeling confused by his strange behavior. Outside the room, Sir Ciel looks deeply troubled and hides his face in his hand, quietly whispering the name Arva. Sir Ciel decides to make a detour to the royal castle first, even if he feels bad for keeping Faustina's family waiting. Inside the carriage, Faustina agrees they have to see the prince off, while the young prince addresses Sir Ciel as his uncle. The young prince looks a bit upset and begs Sir Ciel not to send him back home all by himself ahead of the others. Sir Seal explains that the king called for him anyway, so the timing is actually perfect for the talk he needs to have. When the young prince asks about his father, Lord Veled teases him by saying the crown prince is just sulking because he missed out on tea. The young prince is totally flustered and shocked to hear that his own father is acting so childishly. Lord Veled teases Faustina about how soundly she was sleeping and how he decided not to wake her, but she just snaps back that she is already well aware of that. The young prince looks really disappointed as he mumbles to himself about how he really wanted to have tea with Faustina as well. Lord Veled continues to push buttons by asking how good the morning cookies were, which leads Sir Seal to tell him to stop being mean, while Faustina tries to keep the peace by suggesting they all eat sandwiches and tea together. However, Sir Seal looks into the pot with a surprised face and realizes that the tea has already run out. Sir Seal casually suggests stopping at a shop on the way to brew some more, though the young prince is worried because the king is supposed to be waiting for them. Sir Seal just laughs it off and claims the king actually enjoys waiting, leaving Faustina and the prince unsure if this is a good idea, though the prince eventually gives in since it's coming from his uncle. Faustina notices how much Sir Seal is enjoying the moment and asks him if he really loves tea that much. Sir Seal admits his big dream is to grow his own leaves and create the perfect tea, making Faustina realize he's a total tea fanatic. Lord Veled teases him, saying he's really just stalling to annoy the king, but Sir Seal thinks that's a pretty mean way to describe his plans. Sir Seal hops out of the carriage as they pull up right in front of a shop with a big teapot sign. He turns back toward the carriage with a kind smile and asks the two kids if they want to come along too. Hearing the invite, both Faustina and the prince look absolutely delighted and ready for their tea break. Someone realizes they will stand out way too much looking like nobles, so they decide they need a quick change. Sir Seal tells Bernhard to wear a hat and dress like a commoner, while advising Faustina to tie up her bright hair so they don't draw any unwanted attention. Once their disguises are all set, they head over to the shop and get ready to head inside. Walking in, Faustina is totally amazed by all the pretty jars lined up on the shelves. Sir Ciel asks the maid to fill his container with tea, and she is so surprised to see a priest that she rushes to help him immediately. As she looks around, Faustina spots a jar labeled Elizabeth Flower and wonders what kind of tea it could be. Faustina recalls that right before she was kidnapped, a man named Volt gave her a specific tea called Elizabeth Flower. She thinks about how familiar that name sounds as she reaches out toward the shelf. Sir Ciel notices her staring and asks if she's curious about the jar he's holding. Faustina notes that it sounds like a woman's name, and Sir Ciel explains it was actually named after the lady who first created the blend. Faustina takes a sniff of the tea and is instantly shocked by the scent. Sir Ciel looks a bit troubled himself, thinking about how the smell is just like a tea from the past that's been bothering him. Ciel holds up a jar and kindly tells Faustina that if she likes it, he would be happy to give it to her as a gift. Looking at the rows of bath salts on the shelf, Faustina feels a bit bad and insists on paying for them herself. Ciel gives her a warm, gentle smile and says that his only real goal is to make her happy. Hearing those sweet words makes Faustina blush like crazy, and she looks completely flustered by his kindness. She stammers out a quick thank you and says she will go ahead and buy it after all. As she walks out of the shop, Faustina can't help but wonder why Ciel seems like a totally different person than he was earlier this morning. Faustina blushes and thinks to herself that while Sir Ciel has always been kind, lately he is being much more gentle with her. As she is lost in her own thoughts, Sir Ciel calls out her name to get her attention. She asks the prince if it is really okay for him to stop looking, and after he agrees, he suggests they go for a little walk together. When the idea of having Lord Veld come along is brought up, Sir Ciel quickly says that was not what he meant at all. Sir Ciel holds her hand as they walk and makes it clear he wants it to be just the two of them. Looking up at him with wide eyes, a flustered Faustina softly admits that she wants to be alone with him too. Sir Ciel blushes as he says his only real wish is to make Faustina happy. He gives her hand a firm squeeze, even though he knows the day their engagement ends might be closer than they think. As they walk through the flowers, Faustina smiles and thinks about how she wants things to stay just like this until that moment comes. Meanwhile, in a carriage, the red-haired man asks about the kids, and Sir Ciel explains that he's keeping a close eye on them during their walk. The red-haired man gives a sly smirk and asks Sir Ciel if he's finally made up his mind about what to do next. Sir Ciel looks back with a very sharp and intense stare, making his friend point out that he has a really mean look on his face. The scene opens on a beautiful white palace with tall spires reaching up into the bright sky. Inside, a group of people walks through an ornate hallway filled with fancy tables and gold-trimmed decor. Faustina introduces herself as the daughter of a duke, sharing the secret that she still has all the memories from her previous life. Seeing her look a bit worried, Sir Seal asks if she is nervous about meeting the king, and she admits that she really is. Sir Seal is a kind-hearted priest who always carries a gentle and calming smile. He laughs and tries to cheer her up by saying that a king is really just a normal guy, even if calling him ordinary sounds a bit strange. We find out this newcomer is actually the former king's son and the current king's half-brother, making him a real prince. Faustina notices the way he was introduced sounded a little mean, and she wonders if the two brothers actually dislike each other. Looking at the group, she realizes the crown prince is also acting really nervous about this whole situation. The taller man teases the crown prince for being so tense around his own father, but the prince just tells him to stop it, since he already knows the deal. This cheeky newcomer is Sir Veled, and he just smiles playfully, while everyone else is so serious. He jokes that he might get scolded for acting so casual, especially since he joined in to rescue Faustina for no big reason at all. Faustina notices that just like her, this boy was also kidnapped, but his situation seems much more complicated. He is a total mystery who knows Sir Ciel and has followed them all the way to this royal meeting. Prince Bernhard calls out to Faustina, but she just looks worried, thinking he is going to get into trouble with the king because of her. He quickly tells her not to worry though, insisting that everything he did was his own choice. This is Prince Bernhard, the boy who is supposed to be her future husband, even if they aren't officially engaged yet. Since he fell for her sister in her past life, Faustina decides her main goal this time is to make sure their engagement never actually happens. Bernhard admits his actions might have been reckless, but he figures that since a lady who was taken can't become the crown princess, his wish to stop the marriage will be granted soon. He looks right at her and says he has no regrets at all, because making sure Faustina was safe was more important than anything else. Even with him being so sweet, Faustina stays focused on her own goal, which is to make sure their engagement gets cancelled. She realizes the prince is acting very different from how he did in her past life, but she still feels like she has to move forward with her plan. The two finally reach the room where the blonde King Sirius is waiting, and he tells them both to come inside. Faustina realizes she's finally meeting King Sirius, who looks at them and tells them to go ahead and make themselves comfortable. King Sirius looks at Faustina and tells her he's so happy she's okay and safe. Faustina thanks him and says she's really sorry for making him worry. The king gives Prince Bernhard a sharp look and says they'll talk later, making the prince quickly agree while looking a bit nervous. Prince Bernhard doesn't seem too bothered though, and just stands there looking casual in front of the king. While Prince Bernhard gives a playful wink and a wave, the king just looks back at him with a really tired and grumpy expression. Someone calls out to the king, but he completely ignores Prince Bernhard's cheeky goodbye as they all head out. The blonde-haired noble mentions that he would like to finish up their meeting, but he still has one last thing to address. King Sirius closes his eyes and gives him the go-ahead, agreeing to wrap things up for now. The blonde-haired noble orders the three ministers to be taken to a different room, while the dark-haired attendant gestures for the rest of the group to follow him. As they head out, Faustina looks around in confusion and asks out loud where Sir Veled has gone. It turns out the messy-haired man is already waiting in the tea room and rudely asks why the brat is there, but the blonde-haired noble tells him to calm down. Sir Veled gives a cheeky smirk and asks if it isn't totally awkward for just the two of them to be hanging out alone together. King Sirius stares intensely, looking like he has some heavy questions on his mind. He praises CL for being the one to rescue Lady Faustina, and CL simply agrees with him. Sirius finds it strange that CL found her before the royal family or the Duke's house, but CL just claims he got lucky. The king tells him he won't put up with such a weak excuse, but CL just smiles and acts like there's nothing else to say. Getting straight to the point, Sirius asks if CL was actually the one who planned the whole kidnapping from the start. While Sirius watches him closely for a reaction, CL just acts surprised and asks if he really thinks it was him. King Sirius asks if CL planned the whole thing and then cleaned up the mess, noting that a man named Volt Fuchs had a perfect plan. The king points out it's impossible for CL to find her so fast after hiding for 7 years, but CL claims he just got a tip from one of his followers. While the king looks on in total shock, CL speaks up and tells His Majesty that he has something to add to the conversation as well. CL gets a smug look and asks if the Duke's family could have stopped the kidnapping if they had actually bothered to check their servants' backgrounds. He chuckles and teases the king, saying it's in bad taste to act like this since Sirius already knows CL is the one behind everything. He admits that while the Duke's house definitely made mistakes, they never actually ignored Faustina or treated her poorly. CL says that raising her with the best care possible is only natural, especially since that's the promise everyone made to him. He suddenly stands up and says he'll handle the rest of the details directly with with the Duke's family, which catches King Sirius totally off guard. As Seal heads for the door, King Sirius shouts for him to wait, yelling his name and insisting their conversation isn't over yet. The long-haired man tells the king that his behavior is weird because he hates Ciel but still clings to him, which is exactly why Ciel is so annoyed. He calls out to the king again, who looks visibly upset and starts to sweat as the weight of those words really hits him. King Sirius doesn't have an answer, so he just turns his back and walks away with a heavy heart. King Sirius looks back with regret, wishing he'd found a way to reach out to Ciel when they were younger, even if he had to sneak past his mother's watchful eyes. He remembers how his mother, the queen consort, was way too proud to let him have any contact with his half-brother Ciel. Sirius only did what he was told because seeing his mother so sad was just too painful for him to bear, but he's clearly struggling with that choice now. He thinks back to seeing a young Ciel standing off on his own, looking completely lonely and left out from the rest of the family. Even back then, Ciel's face was totally blank, looking like a kid who had already lost all hope in the people around him. Back in the present, Sirius covers his face and admits that it's way too late for regrets, because you can never actually go back and fix the past. While things are tense elsewhere, King Sirius is seen sitting alone at a tea table, looking pretty lonely. Over in another room, little Faustina is sitting at a big table with a young boy when they hear a sudden knock at the door. To their total surprise, the queen walks in, and while Faustina is stunned to see Her Majesty, the boy calls out to his mother. Faustina can't even find the words to speak, as the queen calls out her name with a look of pure worry. The queen immediately rushes forward and wraps Faustina in a tight, loving hug, holding her head gently. Crying tears of joy, the queen says she is just so happy that Faustina is safe, which leaves the young girl looking really touched. The queen asks if he's hurt anywhere, and Prince Bel gives a sweet smile and says he's perfectly fine, making her feel much better. But then he looks totally caught off guard when she suddenly calls him by his nickname Bel. Her face goes dark as she tells him that the two of them have something they really need to discuss. She orders him to a nearby room, and as they walk away, Faustina realizes the queen definitely has a scary side to her. Suddenly, the sound of someone running fills the hallway as a voice calls out for Lady Faustina. A young boy named Prince Neige suddenly appears, looking bright and happy as he rushes over to see her. Prince Neige tells Faustina he is happy to see her looking so healthy, and she politely thanks him. Neige is actually the second prince, and Prince Bernhard's younger brother, but because he gets sick easily and stays home, Faustina remembers from her past life that he is a really smart and kind person who helped her a lot. Neige suggests they keep chatting until Sir Ciel gets back, and Faustina happily agrees to the idea. Just then, Sir Ciel returns with Prince Bernhard and thanks the two of them for waiting. Sir Ciel asks if they are ready to head over to the Duke's house, and Faustina tells him she is all set. As they get ready to leave, Faustina gives a warm thanks to Prince Neige, and he smiles while telling her they should definitely talk again soon. Sir Ciel politely asks Prince Neige to excuse them as they prepare to get going. Prince Neige watches them leave with a faint, knowing look on his face. As Faustina starts to head out, Prince Neige calls out to ask if she's really leaving already, and she stops to acknowledge him one last time. The queen reminds Neige that they need to show everyone at the Duke's house that he is safe very soon, which the prince admits is true. Prince Bernhard wonders if the crown prince wouldn't prefer to see her home personally, now that they've come this far. Neige starts to say something, but the queen quickly cuts him off and tells Faustina to take care as she departs. The queen tells Prince Neige with a smile that the king will definitely have some choice words for him when he gets back, and a nervous Neige can only stammer out a yes. The queen formally asks Sir Ciel and Sir Velid to look after Faustina, then bids the girl a warm farewell as Sir Ciel happily accepts the task. Faustina is secretly delighted that she gets to stay with the prince a bit longer, thinking to herself how grateful she is to Sir Velid for the extra time. Out of nowhere, Sir Velid hands something over to a very confused Faustina, simply telling her it's for her as he drops it into her palm. She stares down in shock, realizing that the mysterious gift is actually a gross rhinoceros beetle larva. Faustina lets out a terrified scream and flings the bug into the air, leaving Prince Neige totally stunned by the sudden chaos. Prince Neige and Faustina are both left breathless and totally shocked by the sudden chaos. Sir Velid catches a small object and notes that it is a really well-made little stuffed animal. Sir Ciel looks at him suspiciously and asks what he is plotting. Sir Ciel just gives a mysterious smile, looking like he's enjoying the situation. Prince Neige gives a gentle smile, while a flustered Faustina feels like everyone is just waiting for something interesting to happen. Eventually, the whole group settles into the carriage together to head out on their journey. Prince Neige sits beside Faustina and thinks about how even though he got in trouble, he's just happy he was able to save her. He looks down with a serious face, telling himself he's already made up his mind and promises he won't make any more mistakes. Suddenly, he stops and wonders why he's even having those kinds of thoughts again. Outside, the group nears their destination as they realize they'll be arriving at the Duke's house very soon. As the carriage clatters along the road, Faustina looks out the window at the passing scenery. Prince Nage tells Faustina they're finally back at the mansion, while she just stares at the building in silence. Faustina agrees with the prince but admits she doesn't actually feel like she was ever really kidnapped. Prince Nage looks at her very seriously and tells Faustina that she was just lucky things worked out. He adds that if he had woken up even a little bit sooner, there is no way he would have been able to stay this calm. Sir Veld awkwardly agrees with the prince's point, while Faustina sits there looking a bit surprised. Sir Veld jokes that most kids can't sleep for 2 whole days straight, which makes Faustina groan in annoyance. As the carriage keeps moving along, Prince Nige tries to play peacemaker and smooth things over. Lord Ciel helps Faustina step down from the carriage and tells her he's just glad she didn't have to face anything too scary. He looks down at her with a really warm and kind smile. Faustina is clearly struck by his gentleness and can't help but stare back at him. She thinks about how reassuring his smile is as they walk together, but suddenly, she hears someone screaming her name from across the yard. She looks over to see her parents rushing toward her, looking absolutely pale and worried sick. Faustina calls out for her father, and he immediately runs up and pulls her into a tight, desperate hug. The frantic father closes his eyes and cries, telling Faustina how thankful he is that she's safe. He pulls her into a tight, protective embrace, while the worried mother watches the emotional reunion from behind. Faustina is completely stunned by the sudden hug and can only manage a small sound as she stares ahead in shock. Nearby, the worried mother is so overwhelmed with emotion that she clutches her dress and starts to break down. She calls out Faustina's name through her tears, saying how glad she is that her daughter is finally home. Faustina remains wide-eyed and silent, clearly taken aback by her parents' intense display of love. Lord Ciel pulls Faustina into a tight hug, while her mother just breaks down nearby, completely overwhelmed. Faustina is just stunned, her eyes wide as she tries to handle all the sudden emotion around her. She realizes that Linz and the other maids are crying too, and it hits her that everyone was terrified for her. Linz is especially upset, covering her face as she lets out all the stress she's been holding in. Faustina tries to find her words, but just grips Lord Ciel's coat while he tells her she was in some serious trouble. Gazing at her home, she thinks of her father, her mother, and every single person who was there for her. Faustina clings to her father, Lord Ciel, crying as she asks if she made everyone worry too much about her. Suddenly, a hand offers her a handkerchief while a familiar voice warmly welcomes her back home. Still held by Lord Ciel, Faustina looks over and realizes it's her brother standing there with the cloth. She stares at the handkerchief with teary eyes, feeling completely overwhelmed by the kind gesture. Faustina calls out to her brother as she rushes forward, but he quickly turns to the royal guests to apologize for his emotional outburst. After his brief moment of emotion, the brother politely invites everyone to head inside the house, while Faustina stands there in silence. Faustina thinks to herself that her brother is trying way too hard to act all cool and composed right now. As a maid waits by the door, Cain strolls ahead casually, with the young prince following close behind. Lord Ciel puts on a brave face, but you can tell he's feeling the pressure because of his stiff, forced smile. The noble guest calls out to Lord Ciel, making it clear that they have some serious things to talk about. Faustina looks a bit puzzled until the guest calls her by her nickname, Anna, to get her attention. The noble guest explains they have some serious things to talk about with her father and asks Fauna to go keep the prince and Cain company. Cain leads the way and tells Fauna they should get going. Back in the main hall, the young prince stands tall in front of Lord Ciel and the dark-haired noblewoman. Everyone moves to the lounge to sit down and discuss things properly. Lord Ciel and the dark-haired noblewoman look incredibly tense as they wait for the prince to speak. The young prince looks directly at Lord Ciel and asks if he remembers the promise from 8 years ago. Lord Ciel quickly says, "Of course," and insists he hasn't forgotten it for a single day. So the young prince smiles and says, "That makes things much easier." The blonde nobleman sits with his legs crossed and firmly asks for his daughter to be returned to him. Faustina just watches him quietly, taking in everything that's happening. She remembers how her sister stole her fiancé in another life, and after she tried to kill her out of jealousy and failed, her engagement was cancelled and she died alone in total misery. Looking back, she knows that sad version of herself was who she used to be in her past life. Meanwhile, the sun shines over the massive mansion where all of this is unfolding. Even though she's now Faustina, the Duke's daughter, she still has all the memories from her past life while having tea with her guests. To keep from making the same mistakes again, Faustina's main goal is to get her engagement cancelled. She knows the royal family hates any kind of drama or gossip, so she expects them to make a big announcement soon because of her kidnapping. Things are going just like she hoped, but she still feels a bit off as she watches Kane offer tea to the prince and hears Bernhard thank him. She looks over and sees Crown Prince Bernhard sitting there with a very gentle smile on his face. Comparing him to her memories, she thinks about how her fiancé seems like a completely different person than the guy from her past life. Suddenly, Kane asks how she's doing, and Faustina is a bit surprised to hear her brother checking in on her like that. Faustina cheerfully says she is doing just fine, and Kane looks really relieved as he says how glad he is to hear that. While holding her drink, Faustina starts to say that it might be a bit improper of her to bring this up. She explains that it is just a shame she can no longer drink that delicious hot cocoa. Kane calls out her name softly, while Bernhard looks totally confused and asks her what she means by that. Faustina thinks of a man named Volt, explaining that the cocoa made by her family's former butler, the same guy who kidnapped her, was actually really good. Bernhard stays quiet with a troubled look, but Kane admits he kind of understands how she feels, even if the situation is complicated. Prince Bernhard looks very serious, as he reminds everyone that kidnapping a noble lady is a major crime that results in the death penalty, so they shouldn't say anything that sounds like they're defending the kidnapper. Kane quickly agrees with his brother and explains that because Faustina was asleep the entire time, she might not feel as scared as most people would expect. Faustina looks at her brother and asks Kane not to be angry with the man, and Kane gives in, saying he will do whatever the prince wants. Kane gives her a warm smile, but Faustina is quietly thinking to herself that their engagement still hasn't been officially called off yet. Prince Bernhard sips his tea and mentions that he wants to keep up a good relationship with them, but then he gets curious and asks why the priest was with them. Kane explains that it was actually the priest's helper who found where Faustina was before the palace guards or the Duke's men even got there, though the details are still a bit unclear. Faustina thinks about everything that has happened and realizes that the whole situation is actually really strange. While the group sits together in the room, she wonders why the priest was even out searching for her in the first place. The wavy-haired blonde man looks toward her and says he wants Faustina to return his daughter to him. Hearing this, Kane and the woman with dark braided hair look extremely nervous and can barely find the words to respond. The man standing by the door remembers the promise made 8 years ago to keep the girl safe and raise her to be a happy child. The wavy-haired blonde man points out that if those were the intentions, it is a pretty bad sign that she ended up being kidnapped. He explains that Faustina is actually the reincarnation of the goddess Linnamorado, who hasn't appeared for centuries, and because of an old promise between the gods and the royals, she is forced to marry into the royal family. The wavy-haired blonde man looks pained as he remembers how her mother died giving birth to her, and how they only sent her to the Duke's house to be adopted for her own safety. The man standing by the door admits that the visitor has every right to be angry, but he isn't finished talking just yet. He speaks up and says that Faustina thinks of their home as her own, and that they all see her as a truly precious part of their family. The wavy-haired blonde man stops to wonder if ripping her away would actually be the best thing for the child, and the room falls into a tense silence. He calls out to Duchess Wittgenstein, and she looks like she's about to snap from the pressure as she sits there trembling. A voice cuts through the room, saying they've heard every single detail about how the Duchess treated that poor child. The speaker points out that the Duchess was incredibly harsh to a little 8-year-old girl, never even letting her feel like she had anyone to lean on. It's clear she treated Faustina like a total outsider, showing a huge difference between her and the love she gave her own biological child. The Duchess starts to stutter out an excuse, but she's quickly cut off as someone calls for Lord Seal. Lord Seal just smiles and says his wife was only being strict because of the pressure of raising a future queen, though he knows the kidnapping might get her engagement to the prince cancelled. Despite all the drama, he firmly insists that Faustina is definitely going to become the crown princess. Duchess Wittgenstein snaps that she was only harsh to Faustina to protect her future and to make sure she'd be known as the mother who raised the next queen. Lord Seal looks serious, as he realizes that if this engagement gets cancelled, every bit of their hard work until now will have been a waste. The Duchess is cut off mid-sentence and lets out a gasp of shock as someone suddenly enters the room. She lets out a terrified little squeak and cowers on the sofa while Lord Seal flatly tells her to shut up. Out of nowhere, a man with long dark hair appears and holds a sharp dagger right against Seal's throat. The long-haired man looks very calm as he notes that Lord Seal is actually surprisingly short-tempered. The long-haired man keeps his cool while Lord Seal holds his hands up and asks him to just put the knife away already. Seeing the Duchess looking faint, Lord Seal rushes over to her side and calls out her name, Lumi. He apologizes to their guest, explaining that he really needs to let his wife get some rest right now. After they all sit down, the Duke tries to save face by insisting that neither he nor his wife ever ignored or mistreated Faustina. CL claims the Duchess was only ever strict because she cared, but the long-haired man finds it hard to believe she did it for the girl's sake. We see a memory of a crying Faustina, and though the Duke would comfort her and argue with his wife about it, that was really as far as his help ever went. It turns out the Duke always let his wife boss him around, while poor Faustina was left crying in the background. Looking at Lord Seal's calm smile, the red-haired man wonders if he's moved past being angry and just feels totally empty now. The Duke tries to change the subject, saying they can't make any big decisions alone, since Faustina is still the Crown Prince's fiancée. The red-haired man can tell the Duke is just trying to stall for time, but Lord Seal stays completely quiet. Lord Seal finally speaks up and agrees that they really need to think about what Faustina wants for herself. The Duke suggests they talk about this with the king later and quickly takes his leave for the day. Lord Seal starts walking away while the red-haired man follows right behind him and opens the door. Barrett is completely caught off guard when he sees Lord Seal looking stressed and breaking out in a cold sweat. Barrett asks what happened, and Lord Seal finally thanks him for stepping in and stopping him earlier. Bird gives him a smug look, asking if he realizes how lucky he is to have him around, and Lord Seal admits he is right. Looking a bit defeated, Lord Seal explains that he just cannot seem to stay calm when it comes to that young girl. Virid tells him that caring so much isn't a bad thing at all. Right before the scene shifts back to what happened 8 years ago, Lord Seal looks back on the day he first held Faustina as a tiny newborn baby. He promises himself that he will never let her look as sad and lonely as she did back then. Back in the hallway, Lord Ciel asks Vered if he said something, but Vered just smiles and says it was nothing. The flashback moves forward to a young Faustina having tea with Vered and the young prince when they hear a knock at the door. A young girl named Elvira steps into the room, looking a bit nervous as she greets everyone. Faustina is clearly shocked to see her and calls out Elvira's name in surprise. Faustina watches the boys during tea, her mind racing as things start to get a little bit tense. Elvira stands there in total shock, her face turning bright red and tears welling up in her eyes. Faustina's heart starts thumping as she wonders if Lord Bernhard was actually worried about her this whole time. Suddenly, Elvira lunges forward and grabs onto Lord Bernhard, making him nearly drop his plate of cake in surprise. Faustina looks on with a deadpan smile, feeling relieved to see Elvira acting like her normal, dramatic self again. Still clinging to him, Elvira keeps calling out Lord Bernhard's name with a very determined look on her face. Elvira throws herself at Lord Bernhard with a tight hug, crying out that she has missed him so much. Faustina smiles to herself as she thinks about her position as the Duke's daughter. She explains that she actually has all the memories from her very first life. In that past life, her sister Elvira ended up stealing away the man she was supposed to marry, Lord Bernhard. Faustina admits she was so jealous back then that she tried to kill her sister, which got her kicked out of the house and led to her death. That is why she promises herself that this time, she won't even think about hurting her sister, no matter how annoying Elvira gets. Out of nowhere, Elvira yells at someone to step away from a young man. She clings to her brother Cain, looking completely distressed. Cain is clearly annoyed and tells her there is a limit to how rude she can be. Elvira puts on a big show, crying about how she was terrified because she thought her sister was kidnapped by criminals. Lord Bernhard tries to be nice and wonders if Elvira was actually just worried about Faustina. Cain politely tells the prince he doesn't see how that story explains why Elvira is throwing herself at him. Elvira puts on a big dramatic show, crying about how she was terrified that she might be the next one kidnapped. She turns to Lord Bergehald and tells him that he's the only person who can make all her fear go away. The room falls completely silent as everyone just stares at her, not quite knowing how to react to her outburst. Fauna is totally lost and admits she has no idea why her sister is being so dramatic. Cain sighs and rubs his head in frustration, reminding Elvira that the kidnapper was only ever looking for Fauna. He explains one more time that if they just wanted any noble lady, they would have taken Elvira too, a fact he's tired of repeating. Cain is totally fed up and asks Elvira how many more times he has to explain things before she finally gets it. Elvira starts crying and pouting, calling Cain cruel for saying such terrible things to her. Lord Bergehald gets flustered by the sudden tears and tries to comfort Elvira, telling her not to cry. Watching the scene, Fauna quietly tells Cain she is fine, though she admits to herself that she knew it would end up like this. She notices Lord Bergehald looking at Elvira just like last time, wondering if he finds her sister's selfish attitude cute. Cain eventually hits his limit and tells Elvira to apologize for being rude to the crown prince and go back to her room. Elvira puts her foot down and stubbornly says she refuses to leave. She starts throwing a fit, crying about how she wants to stay and have tea with Lord Bergehald too, which leaves Fauna completely stunned. Cain quickly bows to the prince and offers his deepest apologies for his sister's rude behavior, while Elvira just grumbles under her breath. Finally having enough, Cain tells her it is time to go and drags the screaming Elvira out of the room. Once the chaos is gone, a heavy silence falls over the room as Fauna and the prince just stand there in an awkward quiet. Fauna finally lets out a long, tired sigh, feeling totally drained by her sister's constant drama. Faustina bows low and says she's really sorry for the trouble, while Lord Bergehald watches her and thinks about how differently things are going this time. Lord Bergehald looks at her with a gentle smile and simply asks if that's really how it is. Lord Bergehald tells her she shouldn't apologize, and Faustina thinks to herself about how lively her sister is. While the blonde maid brings over some new treats, Faustina worries that Lord Bergehald will eventually choose Elvira over her anyway. Taking a sip of his tea, Lord Bergehald admits that while he feels bad for Kane, he's actually glad they finally have some time to talk alone. Their quiet moment is interrupted when someone calls out to Lord Seal and Lord Vered as the two men make their entrance. Lord Bergehald asks his uncle if he has finished his discussion, and Lord Seal apologizes for making everyone wait so long. Lord Seal suggests they finally head back to the castle, but Lord Vered lets out a tired sigh and mentions he's really thirsty. Faustina quickly offers to bring some drinks out right away, while Lord Seal watches her in a thoughtful silence. While they all sit down for tea, Lord Bergehald asks what they were talking about earlier, but Lord Seal just acts like he doesn't understand. Lord Seal just chuckles to himself, leaving Faustina and Lord Bergehald to realize he's totally avoiding the question on purpose. While focused on eating his cake, Lord Vered can't help but think that Lord Seal is a very mysterious person. Faustina thinks it is really weird that Vered says he is an orphan, yet he has such fancy habits and is mysteriously close with Lord Ciel and the king. As she watches him, she cannot help but notice how incredibly elegant Lord Vered's manners are while he sits and eats. Noticing her staring, Vered gives her a little smirk and teases her by asking if she is trying to steal his portion of the food too. Faustina gets all flustered and immediately snaps back that he has it all wrong. With a big happy smile, Vered says he is full and satisfied, so he asks if they are all ready to head out. While the prince thinks he is being a bit too bold, Lord Ciel reminds them that they need to leave now, or it will be dark by the time they reach the castle. Faustina says she will go get her mother and father, but Lord Vered tells her there is no need for a formal goodbye. Lord Vered leans back and suggests that she really ought to be allowed to rest a bit longer instead. Faustina looks surprised when she hears that the guests unfortunately have to head back home today. Prince Ciel turns his attention toward Faustina and calls out her name. He gives her a kind smile and tells her she still looks tired, so she should just take it easy for a while. Faustina looks back at the prince and addresses him, clearly touched by his concern for her health. Ciel gives a gentle smile while holding her hand, telling Faustina they should meet up again after she's had some time to settle down. Faustina reflects on how nice that moment was, but a part of her secretly wonders how much longer she'll actually be the prince's fiancée. Darkness falls over the massive estate, signaling that the long, eventful day is finally coming to an end. Back in her room, Faustina is so totally exhausted that she just flops face down onto her bed without saying a word. Her maid watches her and gives her a hard time, jokingly saying that her manners are really lacking for a lady. The blonde maid just gives a warm, knowing smile, clearly fond of her lady despite the teasing. Faustina is absolutely thrilled, because tonight's dinner is packed with all of her favorite foods. She thinks every single dish was totally superb and is clearly enjoying her meal to the fullest. The blonde maid tells her that everyone, from the head chef to all the servants, is just so glad she is finally back home. Hearing this, the blonde maid gets really emotional and can't help but let a few tears fall. The blonde maid apologizes for crying, and Faustina says she is sorry for making everyone so worried about her. The blonde maid pulls Faustina into a tight hug and tells her she is just so happy she made it home safely. Faustina suddenly changes the subject to something that has been on her mind. While a couple of guards stand watch by the door, the blonde maid notices Faustina looks stressed and offers to make her some herbal tea they got from the priest. The blonde maid gestures toward the men and asks if Faustina is talking about the people standing right there. Faustina explains that since she's a girl, she would really prefer if they waited outside her room instead of being right there. The blonde maid gently points out that they are her guards, and, after everything that happened recently, it's necessary for them to stay close. The blonde maid admits that even if it's an inconvenience, it really can't be helped, and they just have to accept it. Faustina thinks the tea's smell and taste are really similar to something she had before, but she isn't completely sure yet. As she takes another sip, she's definitely picking up on something familiar and strange about the drink. She goes completely silent for a moment, clearly deep in thought about her past. As she sets her cup down, she remembers that the name of this tea is almost exactly like the one she was forced to have right before she was kidnapped. A little while later, someone asks her if she's just taking a walk around the mansion. Faustina lets the short-haired guard know that she's actually just on her way to the library. Faustina holds onto her father's arm while he mentions that he might check the library tomorrow for information on herbs. She looks up at him and calls out, and he smiles gently while giving her a soft pat on the head. He suddenly pauses and looks at her closely, as if he is noticing something different about her for the first time. After asking if she is using the bath salts he received from Lord Seal, he tells Faustina that he just wants his daughter back. He tells her she has a lovely scent and reminds her that she will always be his precious daughter. He suddenly pulls her into a warm, tight hug, which leaves her looking completely caught off guard. Faustina softly calls out to Lord Ciel while he holds her close. Lord Ciel responds with a gentle question, still keeping her in a warm hug. Later on, Faustina heads over to the library and starts looking through the books. She looks around the massive family library, thinking about how much she loves how big and open it is. Hugging a book to her chest, Faustina thinks about how relaxing it is to finally be back home. Her eyes sparkle with joy as she enjoys this peaceful moment all to herself. Faustina finds it pretty stifling to have guards following her every move, even though she feels a little bad for being annoyed by them. She starts thinking that maybe she should ask her father if the guards can give her just a little bit of space. While reaching for a book on the shelf, she realizes this situation feels exactly like the past she shared with the prince. She is completely shocked to find a book titled The Abandoned Crown Princess and the Crown Prince Who Cast Away False Love, sitting right there. Faustina stands frozen in the library, unable to believe she is holding this specific book in her hands. She looks deeply troubled because the story in the book perfectly matches what happened between her and the prince in her previous life. Faustina introduces herself as the daughter of a duke, explaining that she actually remembers everything from her past life. The story in the book is about an abandoned princess and a prince who left a fake love behind, focusing on a girl from a noble house whose older sister is already engaged to the prince. This girl in the story is described as being super talented and having a beautiful, almost magical look to her. Because the older sister was so jealous, she ended up being really mean and bullying her younger sibling. Eventually, a kind prince steps in to save her from the bullying, and the two of them fall deeply in love with each other. Faustina realizes with a shock that this is exactly what's happening in her own life, where she's the mean older sister and Elvira is the one being protected. The story explains how the older sister's jealousy got so bad that she actually tried to plan her younger sister's murder, but she was caught and kicked out of the family before she could do anything. The book says the younger princess ended up marrying the crown prince in a huge wedding, and Faustina realizes this matches what her friend Aria told her, though she didn't know the details since she died right after her banishment in her past life. Totally shaken by how much the story sounds like her own life, Faustina slams the book shut with a loud bang while sweat beads down her face. She stares at the pages in total shock, realizing that the story has suddenly taken a really spicy and inappropriate turn. When a nearby servant asks if something is wrong, a blushing and flustered Faustina quickly shouts back that everything is perfectly fine. Clutching the book to her chest, she thinks to herself that the adults should really do a better job of keeping these scandalous stories out of a child's reach. Faustina pauses for a moment as a sudden realization starts to hit her. Looking at the title, she originally thought this was just a typical story about a prince who leaves his fake love for an abandoned princess. However, she remembers that in the actual story, the younger sister is the one who becomes the crown princess, not the one being cast aside. This makes her wonder if the prince who threw away his false love is actually going to abandon the younger sister instead. Desperate for some real answers, she quickly flips through the pages to see how it all ends. But as she reads further, her face drops, and she's left looking completely baffled by what's written in the book. Faustina is totally shocked to see that the book is completely blank. She wonders if there are just some missing pages, but it seems impossible for a book to have this many empty spots. She asks herself what happens next in the story, and who would even put a blank book in the archives, especially since it's so similar to her past life that it can't just be a fluke. Faustina stays silent for a moment and lets out a small sigh as she closes the book. Since she knows she won't find an answer just by standing there thinking, she decides to put the book away for the time being. She remembers she actually came here to look up herbs and still needs to write a thank you note to Lord Ciel, realizing she has a whole lot to get done. Outside, a massive castle towers over everything under a few light clouds. Inside the palace, the king looks completely over it as he stares at a paper and asks his visitor why they even came. It turns out the visitor is a guy named Vered, who looks pretty full of himself as he stands by the window. Vered says he's just there to hand over a report and claims they don't need to involve Lord Seal at all. He goes on to tease the king about not being able to meet with Lord Seal, which has the assistant standing nearby, worried that he's going to make the king snap. The king's assistant cuts to the chase and tells Vered to explain every detail about the recent kidnapping case, since he was involved in it too. Vered finally gets serious, losing his smug grin as he prepares to tell the story. The king's assistant playfully calls him Mai, which makes Vered snap back that his name is actually Mime. The king's assistant suggests starting the story from Faustina's 8th birthday, but Vered quickly says no and insists they have to go back even further. Vered explains that the true beginning is actually when a woman named Ava gave birth to Lady Faustina. The king listens in total silence, looking quite somber as the story unfolds. He recounts how 8 years ago, a noblewoman named Ava gave birth to the daughter of the king's younger brother, Lord Seal, but she died shortly after. That baby was Lady Faustina, and everyone said she looked like a goddess come back to life. Vered points out that the king basically took the girl from Lord Seal by force and made the Wittgenstein noble house adopt her. The king looks on as it's explained that it's actually tradition for any goddess reincarnation to be taken in by that specific family. Vered just gives a cheeky little shrug and keeps the story moving. The king's assistant adds that Faustina's mother, Ava, was so beautiful that she had some seriously obsessed followers pursuing her. Those same people found out about Faustina and spent 8 long years hiding as servants in the house just to plan a kidnapping. After all that waiting and plotting, they finally went through with it and snatched the girl away. The king points out that the young man was also right there when the kidnapping happened, but the guy just casually asks why the king is even bringing it up. Vered makes a heart with his hands and jokes that the kidnappers only managed to catch him because they were targeted by his rare beauty. He laughs it off as a strange coincidence and asks if it isn't surprising how things turned out. The king gives him a very stern look, clearly not believing a single word of his silly excuse. The young man just leans back with a smirk, acting innocent as he tells the king he hasn't told any lies. To himself, he admits he's totally lying, right before mentioning that Faustina was eventually rescued by Ciel. The king points out that Vered found Faustina faster than all the royal guards, so he asks if this kidnapping was actually just a trick the two of them planned. He tells Vered to explain how they were so fast if it wasn't a setup, but Vered just dodges the question and asks why the king is so curious. With a sneaky look, Vered suggests that maybe it was just a father's love that led them to her so quickly. The king's assistant gets really annoyed and tells Vered to stop messing around, while the king stays totally silent. When someone knocks at the door, the assistant tries to send them away because they're busy, but the king tells the visitor to come inside. Ciel steps into the room, looking very calm as he joins the meeting with the king and Vered. Mevin enters the room and politely lets the king know that he has arrived to give his report. As he looks around at the group, Mevin starts to sweat and wonders why the mood in the room feels so incredibly tense. The king gets straight to the point and tells Mevin to go ahead and report what he knows about the kidnapping case. Mevin nods and prepares to reveal the details of their investigation. He shares that they finally found the person they were looking for, the man who was hiding as the Duke's butler, but the guy is already dead. Looking on, Vered secretly thinks about how hard it was to make that guy's death look like a suicide now that the search is finally over. Mevin explains that they found the man's body near Odio Marsh, along with his final letter and belongings, and the king just quietly acknowledges the news. Mevin goes on to say the suspect they caught also poisoned himself, taking his secrets to the grave, and while they are still questioning the others involved in the kidnapping, nobody is talking. The king isn't surprised at all, saying those guys were just hired thugs and he never expected to get much info from them anyway. Mevin stays silent and just watches the king, seemingly deep in thought about the whole situation. Mevin notices that the king isn't reacting much to the report, and wonders what could actually be going through his head. Finally, Mevin asks if this means the whole investigation is officially over. Mevin moves on to the next topic, telling the king that he does not need to waste any energy worrying about the young guy they were just discussing. He explains that this new situation involves a woman named Viscountess Charlotte. Mevin repeats her name slowly, clearly looking deep into whatever lead he has found on her. The king asks if she is just someone they happen to know, but Mevin smirks and says it is not quite that simple. Thinking it over, Mevin reveals that this Viscountess seems to be linked to the very same herbs used to knock out the young lady during the kidnapping. The king looks serious, as he notes that she is actually an important witness in another specific case they are handling. Mevin continues his report, explaining a strange case where young commoners are suddenly becoming completely lifeless, like empty shells. Their investigation revealed that every single one of these victims seemed to have been in a romantic relationship with the Viscountess. Mevin adds that they searched the Viscount's farm but found no sign of illegal drugs being grown, and the Viscount himself seems to know absolutely nothing about it. The king acknowledges the news, but the red-haired man gets grumpy and asks if they're done talking, insisting they shouldn't tell him things that don't involve him. The king notes how fast the guy is to understand things and casually tells him he'll be helping with the case, which makes the red-haired man scream out in shock. The king warns that since he's already heard the secrets, he'll be locked up if he refuses to help, leaving the guy to yell about how bossy and unfair the king is being. The king snaps that he'll lock him up for being rude, then mentions the rumor about the Viscountess always keeping young men around her. The king tells the red-haired investigator it's a good chance to use his good looks, which are apparently handsome enough to get him kidnapped, for the job. Mevin is thrilled by the idea and says that having him on board really helps out a lot. The red-haired investigator tries to walk away, insisting he knows nothing, but then he suddenly pauses to think. He gets curious about the earlier farm search and wonders why they didn't find any drugs that could put people to sleep. With a confident smirk, the red-haired investigator tells the king that he's fine with doing the job after all. The red-haired investigator gives a little smirk and tells the king he will consider this a favor owed. Night falls over the grand mansion, where things seem quiet and peaceful under the starry sky. Outside the bedroom, two guards stand watch while the long-haired maid calls out to her mistress. Inside, the long-haired maid expresses her worry, asking the blonde-haired lady if she is really okay without any guards stationed inside the room. The blonde-haired lady simply smiles and reassures her maid that it will be just fine. She points out that while there are windows, the grounds are covered by guards in the garden, at the main entrance, and all along the outer walls. The long-haired maid nods and agrees that the lady makes a good point. The long-haired maid teases her about the guards hearing her funny sleep-talking, but the blonde-haired lady blushes and insists she doesn't do that. The long-haired maid says to call for help right away if anything happens, and promises she will come running too, so the blonde-haired lady agrees. The long-haired maid wishes her a good night as the rest of the mansion goes quiet. Once she's alone, the blonde-haired lady can't settle down and keeps tossing and turning in her bed. She thinks that maybe she can't sleep because she can feel all those guards standing just outside the room. The blonde lady wakes up in the middle of the night and decides she needs a drink of water to help her settle back down. As she reaches out, someone suddenly hands her a glass, and she sleepily says thank you without even thinking about who it could be. She drinks the water right down, but as she finishes, something feels off, and she looks up with a confused expression. She suddenly realizes there's a man sitting right there in her room, and she stares at him in total shock. Completely caught off guard, she starts to stutter, before finally managing to squeak out a confused good evening. The red-haired investigator just sits there looking calm and cool as he politely wishes her a good evening back. Faustina reveals she's a duke's daughter who actually remembers her past life, but she's clearly struggling through a moment of pain. Lord Vered tells her that her identity isn't the main issue right now, while Faustina yells to ask why he's even in her room. He flashes a charming smile and explains he was just in the neighborhood and simply wanted to bring her a gift. Faustina is totally confused by the mention of a gift and snaps that she's actually asking how he sneaked in, especially since security is so tight after the kidnapping. She adds that he really shouldn't even know where her bedroom is located in a giant mansion like this. Lord Vered just gives her a wink and says he succeeds at pretty much everything because the goddess really likes him. Faustina just stares at him with a totally deadpan look, clearly not impressed by his sudden appearance. When she reaches for her bedside bell to call for help, Vered quickly stops her and begs her to wait a second. Vered admits he broke in on a whim, but insists the delivery was a real act of kindness, though Faustina remains silent and asks if he really just did it all for fun. Vered argues that showing up during the day would be a disaster, because the madam would never let him in and would likely just freak out and collapse. Faustina agrees that is a likely outcome, even if she thinks Vered is the one who caused that bad blood in the first place. After taking the bell away, Vered gives her a charming smile and suggests they just sit down and chat for a while. Vered points out that Faustina must be getting pretty tired of being stuck in her room all the time. Faustina admits that with no trips out and guards everywhere, she's honestly been feeling really trapped lately. She hasn't been given any explanation for why she's being kept here, and while she knows Vered is close to the high priest, she wonders if she can truly trust him, though she just tells him she understands. Vered pulls out an envelope and says it's from Lady Seal, making a surprised Faustina ask if he's actually giving her a letter. She carefully opens the envelope and is surprised to see tickets inside. Vered explains the tickets are for a new show at the theater in town, and, as the letter says, he wants her to go with him and Lady Seal, which leaves Faustina completely shocked and excited. Lord Vered asks if she has any interest in seeing a play, and Faustina excitedly says she definitely does. Looking down at the ticket, she starts to worry that her father would never let her go, but she still really wants to. Lord Vered points out that while she was recently kidnapped, Lady Seal is going to be the one to ask her father for permission. He explains that her father won't be able to say no to Lady Seal, making Faustina wonder if her father's hands are tied because Lord Vered is actually the king's younger brother. Looking at the card, Faustina realizes that this will actually be the very first time she has ever seen a play. She gets a soft smile on her face and really hopes that she actually gets the chance to go. The gray-haired priest smiles and tells Faustina that she'll have some amazing experiences with Lady CL. He secretly thinks to himself that he'll talk it up so much that she'll actually want to come live at the church. He promises her that at the church, she can eat all the delicious sweets she wants and use a library that's just as good as the Duke's. With a finger up, he adds that there's one more big thing she should know. He mentions that Crown Prince Bernhard visits Lady CL too, which makes Faustina question if that's really the case. The gray-haired priest notices she doesn't seem very interested, while Faustina is sure what he's saying just can't be true. Faustina worries that her current good relationship with her sister is only because she isn't bullying her this time, and she fears that history will eventually repeat itself. She believes the prince is bound to fall for her sister Elvira, but the gray-haired priest wonders if she's actually just stressed about her engagement being called off. The gray-haired priest is surprised, mentioning that the prince acted very maturely and showed his true feelings back when Faustina was kidnapped. He tells her firmly that he doesn't think the engagement will ever end because, in his eyes, there is simply no replacement for her. Faustina looks worried and explains that if she really is that important to the prince, then it's actually a huge problem for her plans. The gray-haired priest is completely shocked when he finally catches on, asking if she's actually the one who wants to break up with the crown prince. Faustina dives under the blankets and tells the priest she is tired, so he needs to get out right now. The priest demands an answer, but she threatens to scream if he doesn't go, which he calls a low blow, even though she acts like she doesn't know what he means. The gray-haired priest falls silent, looking down with a very serious expression. He finally gives up and tells her goodnight as he walks away, thinking to himself that Faustina is one strange girl. Left by herself, Faustina stares ahead with a really sad and heavy look on her face.